But we are at 6 o'clock here. So, Lauren, welcome everyone to the Thursday, not November 14th. What day is today? May 22nd. The Thursday, May 22nd special meeting of the City Council. And it is a joint working session with the Planning Board. I am so pleased to have our amazing Planning Board members here joining us today, as well as a very large quantity of our planning folks as well. The amount of talent in this room is incalculable. So let's go ahead. I will call the meeting to order. I'm going to gavel us again. And can we do the roll call for City Council, please, Elisha?
Yes, sir. Thank you. And good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We'll start tonight's roll call with Councilmember Benjamin,
Present.
Mayor Brockett,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts,
Present.
Councilmember Marquis,
Present.
Shuhart,
Here.
Spear,
Present.
Wallach, and Weiner.
Present.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Very good. I would like to now pass it over to Planning Board Chair Mark McIntyre.
Okay, welcome to the joint session with Council and our Planning Board. Shall I do the roll call or you do the roll call on? Okay, all right. I believe we have, I'll start with online. Laura, are you there online? And I don't know if, anyway, Laura was planning on being online. We're going to assume she's, okay,
Hi, Mark. I'm here. Thank you.
great, thank you. All right, Claudia?
Here.
Hands, I guess I'm supposed to do it by last name. Rubbles,
Here.
Roberts,
Present.
and, Kurt Nordbeck. Here. And is, Planning Board Member Boone with us online? Oh, he's not going to be. Okay, so Member Boone is absent, and I'm present. Okay, back to you, Mayor.
Just need a formal call to order the Planning Board, perhaps.
I called the Planning Board meeting to order. There we go. Thank you.
All right. Well, we are called to order. We are roll called, and I will now hand it over to our staff to do our joint work. Or Elisha, would you like to read this into the record for us so we get super formal about it?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Item 1A on tonight's agenda is the joint working session with the Planning Board on the 2025 major updates to the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan.
Thanks so much. I'll put it over to you, Nuria.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I will not take up time. Just want to thank you and appreciate everyone for joining us tonight. I want to say that I was not the one supposed to open it up. Our Director of Planning and Development Services, Brad Mueller, was just here, and he has been called away for a family emergency. So I apologize that he has left us. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to, I believe, Sarah.
Thank you, Nuria. Hello, Planning Board and Council members. I'm Sarah Horn, Senior Planner and the Project Manager for the Comprehensive Plan Update. This evening, we're happy to be here with you to give you a project update and have a conversation on how we move forward over the summer. Before we get started, I just want to say that I am really thrilled to be part of such an amazing core team, and that includes Amelia Harvey, to my left, Vivian Castro-Wooldridge, Tess Shorn, Christopher Johnson. In the audience, we have Chris Ranglos and Tucker Horsch, and then not here in person, but in spirit, Kathleen King and Becca Heeb. So, and many other colleagues, but the core team, they just amaze me every day. So thank you guys. And then I also want to recognize two fabulous colleagues from Housing and Human Services, Holly Hendrickson and Lauren Click from Community Vitality, the Office of Arts and Culture. They're going to present on their projects here in just a minute. And for people watching online, if you can look at the screen, these are all the City Council and Planning Board members. A couple are absent today, but Tess on our team worked really hard to find all of your headshots, so we wanted to make sure we shared them. And while we do, and while we don't have their headshots, I just want to mention that our county colleague Hannah Hipley, who we're working closely with on the project, met with the County Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners yesterday, and KJ also attended that meeting. And now to the purpose of our special meeting tonight. We want to confirm the updated vision statement, community values, and areas of focus for community conversations with you tonight, and identify concepts to be explored further over the summer. And as you can see on this slide, we have a lot of content to cover and important discussions to have tonight. We'll need everyone's help to keep us on track and be respectful of the time we have together, so buckle in. We have a presentation for you tonight broken into two parts. Part one will focus on complementary projects, an engagement update, and the vision and values and focus areas for community conversations. Then we'll move to part two, which focuses on the concepts we've prepared based on community feedback and staff input. These are the concepts our team intends to study over the summer based on your feedback tonight. After the presentation, we'll have a short break, and then we'll dive into the discussion around these concepts. Then we'll close out the meeting with a look at next steps. So before we jump into all things comp plan update, we wanted to highlight a few other of the ongoing projects that are informing our work and tie into the comp plan. So Holly and Lauren will provide brief updates on the first two projects, the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative Innovation Track and the Boulder Arts Blueprint. We won't go over the last two projects, the Economic Vitality Strategy and Improvement Districts Analysis and Commercial Areas Blueprint, because Council recently received updates on these from the projects teams. We recognize that Planning Board hasn't gotten those updates, but you're welcome to look at the memos online, or we're happy to send those to you if you'd like. So I'm going to now pass it over to Holly to talk about the first project.
Right. Thank you so much. So I'm, what'd you say? Get right in there. Okay, will do. Yes, ma'am. So I'm Holly Hendrickson. I'm with Housing and Human Services. I'm a senior project manager for Housing and Human Services, but I am the project manager for this Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Innovation Track. So I'll just, I'm going to just quickly review the purpose, what we're doing in this innovation track to give you a better idea of kind of the goals here and our timeline. So this is a year-long leadership management program where we're led by a team from the Bloomberg Philanthropies, this Bloomberg City leadership team that facilitates this year-long process. So it's like a very intentional, very specific process that we're going through that these facilitators are leading us through. We have a cross-departmental team. There's 9 of us that are working really closely on this project. So there's 3 of us from Housing and Human Services. There's 1 from Planning and Development Services, Utilities, Community Vitality, and Innovation and Technology. So we have like this great cross-departmental team that's diving into this work. So like I said, I'm going to walk you. So there's 4 phases to this project. Or this program. So I'm just going to walk you through the phases and kind of what we've done so far and what we're going to do. So the first phase is the AIM phase. So if you want to advance the slide, it'll help. Okay, so the aim of this program, the AIM stands for the Ambitious Impactful Mission. And the Ambitious Impactful Mission that was identified back in October is the following. By 2035, we will expand and sustain innovative, attainable housing options so that Boulder becomes a more vibrant and inclusive community reflecting people from all backgrounds. So this is kind of our North Star in the process. The team came up with it back in October or the end of last year, and we kind of keep this as like the North Star. We keep looking at this as the thing we're trying to achieve through this process. So after that was established, the team was established, we dove into the design or the research design phase. So it's this light purple phase, which was a lot, kind of like the bulk of the work that we've done so far has been in designing research. So with the program facilitator, we designed a research plan, and it was a very intentionally designed research plan with a whole team of people from Johns Hopkins and, a whole team of us. So after the research plan was established, we dove into what we called our research sprint. So we identified the affected parties within our community that this AIM involved. And then we conducted lots and lots of interviews. We gathered lots of feedback from the community. And we then therefore synthesized the data and identified like high-level research insights. So I'm kind of leading you through this like long process that we went through with the research design. Just recently, in the past few weeks, we held 4 ideation sessions. So these were essentially brainstorm sessions, and through these brainstorm sessions, we gathered over 800 ideas from different these 4 different groups, and we just completed that. There's a little yellow star at the bottom, indicated that we are just entering in our activate phase. And in this phase, we're prioritizing all of these ideas that came, pulling out our top, I think there's 8 to 10 that we're looking for, and we're gonna start testing some of these ideas this program calls them prototyping, but we're essentially testing these ideas to see if there's any legs, see if we can actually do anything with these ideas in our community. Everything wraps up in July, and in July, we're going to be identifying, so we'll have tested 2 ideas. We'll have a portfolio of 10 total ideas that we can kind of further after the program ends. And then, what else was I going to say about that? One of the problems with this program is we know exactly how much they've told us so far. And so where we are in this yellow, I'm kind of guessing exactly how what the future looks like here. So our goal, I will say, ultimately, we're going to have these ideas. We'll end in about July or August, and we believe the timing here is ideal because we'll have this portfolio of ideas that we can kind of somehow feed into this comprehensive planning process. So there's a timing that works with all of this. And hopefully those ideas will kind of be beneficial to how this process goes forward. Okay, so I'll leave it at that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Click. I manage your Office of Arts and Culture in the Community Vitality Department. I am so excited to share a very brief 3-slide update on the Boulder Arts Blueprint. This will be the new plan to guide arts and culture policy, programs, and funding. So what is the Arts Blueprint? It is a long-term initiative with a broad focus on strengthening Boulder's entire cultural ecosystem. This will translate high-level policies from the comprehensive plan into concrete tactics and work plans for our office. It'll also help inform citywide cultural policies and priorities and establish a shared vision for departments and leaders and help us steward the arts, culture, and heritage tax. Next, please. Thank you. We began this in late 2024, and we have intentionally aligned to the comprehensive plan. We are in phase 1 now, and phase 2 will run through early 2026. The planning horizon for our last, why and why now? The planning horizon for the last cultural plan was reached in 2024. Voters passed the 20-year Arts, Culture, and Heritage Tax, which runs from this year until 2045. Our creative community is still navigating challenges from post-COVID, and at the same time, opportunities like hosting the Sundance Film Festival has elevated the importance of cultural investment and planning. And thank you to all of you who are involved in bringing the bid and bringing Sundance Film Festival to our community. Next, please. Progress to date. Here's what we have accomplished so far. For phase 1, we've conducted extensive research, benchmarking, and engagement with the community, often overlapping with the comprehensive plan's excellent events. Thank you so much for partnering with us on all of these. We've also used the Race Equity Rapid Response Tool to begin assessing early recommendations for any unintended impacts. We've also reviewed the engagement activities with our city expert staff to ensure that phase 2 covers any kind of gaps missing. And I think in closing, I just want to say that this is a really important moment for arts and culture in Boulder. I think you all know that. The blueprint is really going to strengthen our cultural ecosystem in ways that support your city council and planning board priorities and our city's overall goals. Thank you.
Good evening, all. My name is Vivian Castro-Wooldridge, and I'm leading the engagement strategy and implementation for the plan update. It's been really wonderful to work alongside these other teams and projects to continue to build more voices into the comp plan process. And I'm going to share with you in a few slides where we are currently in the process and discuss how we've been working with the community and what we've learned along the way. The last time we had this group all together was in February as we were wrapping up the existing conditions work in the Boulder Today phase and moving into phase 2, a Boulder Tomorrow. And we're now ready to complete the second phase and dive into policy conversations and work. Engagement has been woven into the process throughout the project to make sure we're hearing diverse perspectives, new ideas, and giving multiple opportunities to be heard. And the community process for the comprehensive plan update launched last October with the community open house. Many of you attended that. And since that open house, we've tried a lot of different methods for engagement and have had great participation across the community. Here's some highlights. We've collected over 4,000 comments across 31 different events and opportunities. Over 1,000 people have participated so far, which is amazing, and thank you to everyone who has helped us connect with community members over this time. And we've also held 10 events specifically to reach groups historically excluded from planning processes and reached over 250 people through these efforts. And all of that engagement has been informing the vision, values, and areas of focus that you'll be reviewing tonight. And we'll explain how the engagement process has supported multiple iteration cycles on these important pieces of the plan to get us to the place where we are tonight. And since we're trying new things in the process and stretching our engagement practice, we wanted to share back with you some lessons that we're learning along the way about engagement. First, we found that partnering with local community organizations like Modus Theater and Once and Future Green has been really effective in reaching new people that don't typically participate in such local government processes and helping ensure belonging in this process and hopefully beyond. Second, long-range planning is not a particularly well-known topic for a lot of community members, and so we put a lot of effort into educating people about the process and why participation is important, but we're also working to keep pace and momentum and deliver the project on schedule, so that's been a challenge for us. And third lesson to share is based on what we're hearing, and it's that fear can sometimes hold us back from finding common ground, and at the core from the input we're hearing, we find that people often want the same thing, but perhaps coming at an issue from a different angle, or passion, or knowledge base, or even with fear of scarcity of resources, or of not being heard, or of not belonging, or of change, or of not enough change. And so as we move to the next phase of work in our engagement, we thought it'd be valuable to share that while the methods of targeted outreach and more traditional exercises have been successful at reaching a wide variety of populations and hearing lots of diverse perspectives, we do want to put our efforts into getting diverse groups together in the same room to tackle the issues of the comp plan. And we're very much looking forward to working with Unify and the Community Assembly over the summer and the fall to help us achieve this goal of more dialogue and deliberation. Thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Tess.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tess Shorn, and I'm a city planner on this team working on the major update to this plan. First, I'm going to walk you through the vision, values, and focus areas. So, the vision statement is intended to express what the community aspires to be in the future. While it's challenging to craft a vision that captures all the wonderful input we've heard so far, we've cycled through drafts with the community and internally multiple times. Based on that input, the recommended vision statement is, our community is welcoming, diverse, and committed to the Boulder Valley. We balance economic and housing opportunities with respect for nature and open lands, serve as a model to others as we face a changing climate, and leverage our community assets and innovative spirit for the benefit of future generations. Next, we analyzed the previous values described in the 2015 Comprehensive Plan, as well as the city's guiding sustainability, equity, and resiliency framework, the guiding principles of Boulder County, and then most importantly, we've gathered community input on values throughout the process so far. And we found that the sustainability, equity, and resilience framework goals really do represent the values that the community holds for the future of the Boulder Valley. And they also align with and in fact progress the values that were described in the 2015 plan. So we will carry these 7 values forward through the comprehensive plan. This will also help to strengthen the relationship between the comprehensive plan and the SER framework. Finally, we are recommending 7 areas of focus for this plan update process. And to clear up any confusion, these areas of focus describe the topics that the community most wants the plan process to address. Community members have identified these topics as either areas where we have great challenges or areas of strength that they would like the plan to build upon. They are not meant to indicate that these are the only issues that we are considering in the process. On the left of the screen is the list of key topics that came out of the February 5th 4-body meeting you all attended. As the engagement process has gone on since, and we've had the opportunity to hear from new voices, we've identified some new or revised topic areas. This is an example of how the community feedback is helping drive the process and outcomes of the plan. Our team has worked hard to identify policy gaps from the 2015 plan based on these areas of focus that were identified by the community. And we also worked with other city departments on existing and future equity considerations for each of these areas of focus. And the memo goes into more detail about this analysis. For today, however, I will now go through what we've heard from the community about each area of focus in a little more detail. Starting with climate action, we have received many comments from a passionate community who are greatly concerned about the climate. They have a lot of ideas to adapt to climate change in the future. These ideas range from small-scale mitigation tactics to cross-sector solutions. Economic issues did not initially rise to the top of community interests. But as the engagement process has gone on, we've heard about a couple of issues. One such being the support of local businesses at a range of scale, from micro businesses to some of our large primary employers. Another thing that's been top of mind for community members is finding ways to build community wealth. Boulder is an expensive place to live, and we've heard people say that they want to be able to learn more about economic opportunities, especially around entrepreneurship, so they can build their own family finances and afford quality of life here. Similarly, the concept of food systems is a new focus area because we've received so much interest and feedback through the engagement process on this topic. People are interested in agricultural practices and opportunities, as well as increasing community-wide access to local and nutritious food. Probably no surprise to this group, housing issues remain a top interest of the community. In general, most comments around this issue describe a need to find ways to increase the housing supply, but we do get comments in opposition to this idea as well. Another focus area that has risen to the forefront as we've collected more input from the community is the idea that Boulder is and should be a multicultural and multi-generational community. Community members seek to strengthen social connections and foster belonging. The next focus area is safety, which continues to be a priority issue for community members. Perception of safety in public spaces and planning for wildfire being at the top of mind in a lot of engagement work we've done. Finally, the community remains passionate about increasing mobility choices into the future and wants to continue to build out the network for pedestrian and cyclists. There's also major focus on addressing performance issues related to the public transit service. All right, that was a lot. That concludes the summary of the vision, values, and the 7 focus areas. or areas of focus. These are the 2 questions that will guide you for this part of the meeting. And here is where we'll open it up for the first discussion. Mayor Brockett.
All right, thanks so much for that excellent presentation from the variety of you. Lots of great information that was very fascinating to hear. So let's open it up to questions. I'll just open the floor for questions. We have the vision and the values, we have the areas of focus, and if people have questions about any of that, I would welcome those now. There's a lot of you, we're all at the same level here, so hold your hand up high if you could when you have a question to ask, and I'll watch for Laura online as well. Who wants to get started? I can't even see who it is. Claudia, and then Tina.
Hi, thank you. Let me try to get close enough here. I have a question about areas of focus. And if I understand correctly, we have the community assembly working on the topic of 15-minute neighborhoods. Is that right? And I'm just curious how that work connects to the focus areas. I could imagine 15-minute neighborhoods being a focus area in its own right, but it's not in this listing. So how does that topic and that work fit in?
Thank you for the question, Christopher Johnson, Comprehensive Planning Senior Manager. The 15-minute neighborhoods, you're correct. The community assembly is focused on that particular topic. Part of why we have not identified that as a specific area of focus in the broader community conversation is because we have that group that is specifically looking at that. I agree that it has sort of been identified as its own area of focus and potentially has the ability to influence a number of these factors like travel options and our housing choice and opportunity, small local inclusive economy, et cetera. So really the 15-minute neighborhood will almost serve as a bit of an umbrella to a lot of these factors, but that's partly why we didn't call it out as a separate topic.
I can also just share that in the next meeting, which is on the 31st, the assembly members will be looking at the focus areas and talking about which ones they feel are most closely linked to 15-minute neighborhoods and would like to dive into deeper. And so we're seeing 15-minute neighborhoods as more like a filter that they can all connect to potentially.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Tina.
Yeah, on the local, the farming and the food systems, when we're talking about land use, is there enough farming land in the city of Boulder, or are we also really thinking broadly about the county land?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, we are absolutely thinking about the county lands as well, and this is a particularly interesting topic where we have a lot of crossover with our county colleagues and the decisions that the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners will be able to involve themselves in. It's interesting because it is a bit of an overlap between city-owned property in many cases of open space lands that's used for agricultural practices, but that does exist out in the county, and so there's a cross-jurisdictional collaboration that needs to occur with that.
And do we feel that we're moving forward in partnership with the county from the beginning in this conversation, or would we, I want to make sure that we're in alignment with the county because that doesn't always happen organically.
Sure. Well, the good news is yes, the county, particularly county staff, has been involved from the very beginning on the project. And as Sarah mentioned, we had a very similar conversation. It was much shorter. Their agenda was limited, so we only had about an hour. But we had a similar conversation with both Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners on these topics and some of the concepts that we'll be sharing later in the evening. So I do believe there's alignment, and there certainly is a lot of cross discussions between our county staff colleagues and ourselves.
Any others? Got Mark?
Thank you. Somebody needs to know how to do this. If my math is correct, and it unfortunately usually is not, it seems that about 2% of our housing stock is would be classified as appropriate for middle income tenants and purchasers. Are we going to be discussing strategies for increasing the level of middle income housing to something a little more robust than 2%?
Yeah, that is certainly a topic of interest and something that we would continue to explore throughout the summer and the fall, as we have those additional community conversations, and then ultimately, as we get into conversations around possible land use map changes and those kinds of things, those will be policies that we'll be looking at and weighing trade-offs and understanding what the community interest is, but then also I think what our role or what the opportunities are for us to section out or target a particular type of housing, and what opportunities we can do to influence that and encourage that type of development.
Kurt, and then I have Nicole, and then Lauren.
I was surprised that in your community conversations, it sounded like affordability was not a particularly high area of interest. And that just, it seems a little odd. And so I saw that you were sort of flowing from the affordability into 4 different areas. But in terms of the more detailed descriptions of those, I really only saw it coming up in the housing context. And so I guess I'm looking to see some sort of a verification that it really will be an area of emphasis in those other areas of focus.
I can maybe start by saying that the 4 main things that we heard about where affordability is really an issue is childcare, healthcare, housing, and food. Those really rose to the top. What we also heard was that like a desire to actually have more economic opportunity for people to have more agency and be able to afford living here because it's a high cost environment. So a realization that that is not going to go away, and that resources, to subsidize all of these things is very difficult. And so the focus, and also we found it confusing in community conversations when we were talking about housing. People often wanted to talk about affordability issues. And so instead of having affordable living as like a separate, we now talk about affordability under housing and food systems in particular for our areas of focus. It doesn't mean that there aren't other conversations to be had, but for our areas of focus, it's food and housing are the important ones. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good for now. Thanks.
Yeah.
Nicole, then Lauren.
And Aaron, can you just clarify, are we just doing the first question or are we
Any
doing
question
both?
that you have on either of those two?
Should I do both now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, just thank you. I so appreciate all the engagement work that you all are doing, and really appreciate you showing us what's changed in your thinking as well as this has evolved from the engagement. I just actually had some questions, more specific ones about kind of word choices and how things changed around the vision statement as well as some of the phrasing of the focus areas. With the vision statement, when it changed from the first to the second, I was just curious why accessible and equitable opportunity came out.
I think it was mostly just a process of us of taking all of that community input that we had received and starting to filter through that and come up with different words. Obviously, it's nearly impossible to choose the right word for every situation when you're trying to craft a vision statement that applies citywide or valley-wide. It's not that those two things are not important, or we see them as being sort of incorporated through some of the other word choices and the other descriptions that we've included. But there was no specific reason why those were removed or replaced with other words.
Okay, thank you. And then it seemed like the original one was a little bit more active as well, in saying our community embraces versus our community is, kind of like a path to how we might get to some of those things. So I was just curious if there was a reason that came out as well.
Yeah, I think similarly, when crafting a vision statement, it's a bit of an art and a science in terms of trying to strike that right balance between sort of the action oriented, but also just painting this picture of 20, 50, 100 years from now, sort of who we are. And so we made the decision to write it really as this is what we are, or who we are, as opposed to focusing on the things we need to do to get there. That we feel like will be captured more in more detail and more descriptively through the values of the SER framework, and then ultimately the policies of the plan itself.
Well, thank you. And then I was wondering, what does it mean to be committed to the Boulder Valley?
That's a great question. What does it mean to you?
And I have to say, while I
sure,
appreciate the
honestly.
enthusiasm in the audience, if we can have quiet, please, from the
Yeah,
attendees.
it was just like I didn't know what that meant, and so
Yeah.
I was just curious what that was getting to.
You know, I think it draws on from our perspective, it draws on the passion that people have for this place, right? And there are people that have been here for a very long time and that care deeply about the community and care deeply about the way things were or have been, and maybe the way that they would be in the future. There's also people that are brand new to this community that care about it and see the potential and see the opportunity here. And so, commitment is something that, if anyone's married in the room, commitment is something that is work, and it takes hard work, and it's not always perfect. Sometimes it's messy, but you're committed to it, and you're going to do what it takes to do it right.
Yep. Okay. No, thank you for explaining that. That's helpful. And then just around some of the focus area wording there too. One of the things that I got from the engagement summaries and things is that with food systems in particular, it seems like there was a real desire for equitable food systems. And so I was just wondering how you see equity kind of fitting into these focus areas, since it's not really named explicitly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, really, the fact that we are using our SER framework and carrying those goals down through the comp plan and describing our city values of those 7 goals, and then ultimately that will translate through our citywide strategic plan, our department plans, et cetera. I mean, that roots equity in everything that we do and the conversations we're having. So even though we haven't called that out specifically, it is embedded within each of those focus areas and will be a focus. We'll get to it a little bit later in the evening, but talking about as we move into this next phase of work, we will be using the racial equity instrument to evaluate all of our different policy choices and options so that we understand what some of those potential harms or benefits might be to different members of the community.
Cool, thank you. And then I think you just asked my answered my last question, but I'm going to ask it anyway just to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So with the climate action focus area, one of the things we've been talking about so much lately as a city is the idea of climate adaptation, resilience, things like that. And so is it the same thing there, that really that climate action, if that's the focus area, it still has the sustainability, equity, and resilience embedded into it, and so that's where
Yes,
where you
that's
expect
right.
it to come out. Okay,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Lauren, and then Mark.
Thank you for putting this all together for us. I had some questions in a similar vein to Nicole. I noticed some similar things, and I think first I just want to start off. Is the vision and values statements intended to be complete at this point, or are we still like workshopping the language?
They are intended to essentially be complete at this point. Obviously, the draft of the plan will not be prepared until early next year, so there is room for continued wordsmithing and adjustment. Actually, we received what I thought was potentially a good edit from one of the planning commissioners at Boulder County yesterday, speaking to the statement in the vision statement that says that that Boulder serves as a model to others as we face a changing climate, and his suggestion was to change that we serve as a model of action as we face a changing climate. And so I think there is room for some strategic changes if we think those are worthwhile and receive support from the group.
Are we going to go share our thoughts about changes and feedback later? Right now it's just questions, correct?
Well, I don't know that this section is coming back to us later on.
Correct. We have about 30 minutes total for sort of conversation around these particular items. So I would recommend, if you have something, go for it.
Yeah, I guess I've had a lot of alignment with the ideas that were presented, but I think similar to kind of what Nicole was getting at, often I think the language is a little clunky or might not hit right for different people in different groups. I think that I would recommend workshopping it a little bit more, and I would like to see it be more aspirational. I think even, just starting off with things like our community is welcoming and diverse. Like, if you don't feel like this community is welcoming to you currently, then that sort of is then, especially this is how this document starts off, and it makes it feel like this document is also not for you. And so I think that just trying to be much more, I think it is important for this to be aspirational, and both in the vision statement and in the values. Thanks.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mark?
I have a question in a similar vein, and that is, I'm a student of the current 2020 BVCP on a weekly basis. And chapter 3 has 9 sections, actually, I'm sorry, 10. 10 sections. Our 7, how do our 7 focus areas that you've delineated now, are those superseding the 10 sections that are in the current plan, or would they be folded into, or how would that relate?
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the plan there, earlier, I think in the chapter right before all of the policies, so chapter 2, there is a description of the focus areas that were of community interest back in 2015 originally when that major update was prepared. So that's essentially the same as what these are. I can clarify, these will not be chapters in the future document. We have only scratched the surface about what that format looks like, and if it follows a similar organization like it does today, where all the transportation policies are in one section, all the housing policies are in another one, or if it actually might shift slightly and we use the 7 SER goals as our organizing framework, and then the policies that support those goals, whether they be housing, transportation, etc., those fall under those categories then. So we haven't made any decisions about exactly the organization of the document, but yeah, I can clarify, don't be confused that the areas of focus are the only things that will be addressed in the comp plan. It will still cover all the things that it does today.
Great, thank you for that. I'll simply say that, we all like what we're used to, and I appreciate the structure and organization of the current plan. So that's my comment.
I just wanted to add, like the areas of focus, like KJ mentioned, those are also ways to organize the conversations we're having with the community. And they're the things that have been brought up as the things we need to spend more time thinking about for the update. So the focus areas will be part of the plan, but they may not necessarily end up as sections, like KJ mentioned.
Taisha?
Thank you very much. So I agree with my colleagues regarding the vision statement, and would have some concerns around the proposed process of us not voting or coming to any kind of consensus around some of these core anchoring things until way after a lot of other things are going to come after that are anchored on this thing that we have not all agreed on in any kind of meaningful way. So I just want to express that concern right up at the front, and I'm hopeful that this feedback is taken and we can come back to what our process is and just getting some more consensus building opportunities along the way instead of waiting to the very end. So just from a process perspective. As far as the statement itself, right now it's very human-centric, and have some just general concerns around the wording around nature and open space as if it doesn't include urban. So there's just some synergies that would love to be revisited there. Also, again, the human-centeredness on the future generations. But again, we also are responsible of having, the vibrancy is in healthy habitat, healthy water, clean air, clean water, going back to the aspirational in the neighborhoods that we want to live in. I also look at these vision statements as something that is that our community can hold us accountable to. So I appreciated your comments around some of the words that we're using, because if we're not clear on what those words are, it'll be impossible to hold, for our public to hold us accountable to what we're saying. As far as the areas of focus, I just want to thank our community for lifting up their voice around food systems. Again, I already mentioned the incredible session on food as a utility, and then I actually was late because I was at the farm dinner at the LaRange this evening, just to say hello and extend and continue to build relationships within the farming community. And I was happy to hear that the city and county reached out to the farmers after, again, I expressed my concern of them not being engaged until that point. And it sounds like those visits were very meaningful, and that the relationships, they really felt seen, valued, and heard. So I'm just really grateful, Vivian, to you and the team for getting out and doing that. And again, I don't have any comments there. But I did just have some general questions around, I wasn't clear on like why some of the things from before didn't make it on. And even with the values, it just feels like it's the same. And I know I feel like there's a lot has changed in since the last time that we've done this plan, and even in the last 6 months. And so I just feel, I'm not suggesting that we have to go back and do all of our deep engagement, but I would argue that the core of our nation and our federal everything has changed significantly. And I think this plan needs to be responsive to that. I think if we asked about, people's the affordability conversation would look very different now than it even did 6 months ago. So I want to honor that there are some significant structural changes in the things that are going to impact our ability to meet the focus areas. And so I'm hopeful that that additional layer of engagement is available, and how we can engage our many, many partners like the social venture partners and others to continue to help with that engagement. I was curious, I didn't hear much about the climate action plan, and so I was just, although it's wonderful again to hear about the cultural arts plan, I was also surprised not to see such an incredible pivotal plan not being formally addressed and aligned to this work. And then, let's see. Just equity in general. I heard the use of the racial equity plan tool. That's a qualitative tool that's not designed to do what you're suggesting that it could do in this moment. And so I really am hopeful that we get some more expertise around the balance of qualitative and quantitative, the iterativeness of it, how accountability shows up, similar to the way that we have finance woven within all of this. We haven't talked about finance, but we know finance is heavily embedded in every single thing that we do. And I would love for equity to be as embedded, but when we don't have clear definitions, clear indicators, measures, and metrics of success, that's impossible. So that's just in general an area in the vision and values. If we're taking those words out, then we need to make sure that it is clearly articulated throughout this plan. Otherwise, it's we're whistling in the wind. But those are all the questions that I have about it in this moment, and I look forward to other comments from my colleagues and the planning board. Thank you.
Ryan?
I think I have a few questions. On the vision statement, building on some of what Nicole, Lauren, and Taisha have said, and I really trying to hold back from wordsmithing, because I know this is, this can be a painstaking exercise, but just to follow the logic of the first statement on the paragraph, it says our community is welcoming, diverse, and committed to the Boulder Valley. The word community, to me, I think of that is the Boulder Valley, because this is the BVCP. And so I'm trying to follow the logic of that we are committed to ourselves, and maybe there's more meaning behind that, like the two things connected, and I'm just curious if you could talk about that.
Yeah, part of that word choice was actually to try to draw a bit more of a connection to place. So between, thinking about the community as people, but also the fact that we are committed to this place and the nature and the systems that are here. That was the intent of that. Obviously, vision statements can get fairly obscure pretty quickly. And we are challenging ourselves as a team to write this in as clear of plain language as we can for the majority of the community to be able to understand. that is an extremely difficult thing to do, particularly when you're talking about these very aspirational statements. So we have tried to keep it as succinct and as clear as we possibly can, knowing that, people are going to interpret this or infer different things as they read it based on their own experiences. So our intent was that we were trying to share and create that connection between people in place.
Thank you. Okay, and to the extent that you do have more time to take a look at this, I would agree with Lauren and Taisha, their comments. Second question on the 15 minutes neighborhoods idea. It makes sense to me that that's a theme that is kind of touches different points of the focus areas. I guess my question is procedurally, as we learn more about community interest, feedback on that topic, can you see this? I guess where would that then fit in? If it doesn't fit in as a focus area, is there another place where we could expect it to go or not to go, or where's the home for that in the BVCP?
Okay. Well, I'm going to steal your thunder. The conversation. So the community assembly has met once. They met May 3rd. Their second meeting is coming up May 31st, and then they will take a break over the summer and then reconvene at the end of August. We will have the opportunity to have a number of different community conversations over the summer, and as part of that, be able to tease out those ideas that could then relate back to the 15-minute neighborhood concept. So our plan is to summarize and capture those community conversations and then feed that into the community assembly process. So we'll be creating that linkage between what we're hearing with the broader public, and then bring that to that group so that they have that information as well and can incorporate that into their deliberations and discussion.
Okay, but as far as the BVCP, where it would land in the BVCP as a published document?
The 15-minute neighborhood concept,
yeah.
It most likely is going to show up in a couple of different locations. My sense is it won't be called out again, we haven't started writing it yet, but my sense is it probably won't be called out as a specific chapter or section, but it is going to relate to all these various topics and our economy, our transportation, et cetera. And so my sense is it's going to find its way into policies, specifically around a number of different topics, and show up really kind of throughout the document. Again, if the community assembly believes that that's a supported idea and carries that forward to all of you, and you also support it as well.
Got it. Thank you. And then finally, to the extent that we have comments on within the focus areas, so with respect to specifying or clarifying, when is the right place to do that? Is that tonight, in this very moment, or later?
Yeah, certainly if you have some ideas that are specific details or topics within that larger focus area, now would be a good time to raise those, but also know that these will be the subjects of a lot of our community efforts over the next 4 months or so. So there will be ample opportunity for you to meet with us or attend those community events to be able to feed that information into the process as well.
Okay, then I'll just briefly tell you on climate. Oh, sorry. On climate, I think one thing that would make sense would be to really emphasize the nexus of climate action with well-being. There are a number of types of well-being initiatives that support climate action, especially around creating more freedom and access to housing, transportation, food, and energy, which come up in other parts of the BVCP, but which are 40 to 70%. These are the so-called demand solutions. Incredible rich opportunities there. Clean air is another one. The majority of our fossil fuels are, as we clean our air, we will be reducing GHG. And then also inclusive economy, which of course is related to this as well. But I would just encourage a real strong focus on well-being within the climate action part. And then in transportation, having used the BVCP, the current one, and finding myself sometimes thinking people could look at things and make different interpretations, I'd propose a few clarifications if we can. So the first one is to spell out that we want to provide access to destinations in ways that work for different needs, for different members, for the entire community. And as we know, there's a large percentage of people who cars don't always work for very well. So that's one. The second one is that we would strive to understand the disproportionate impacts of the costs of certain types of modes and behaviors, and look to allocate those to users. When doing so would be consistent with equity, and conversely, that we would provide support and encouragement for transportation modes and behaviors that we think are helpful to stewarding our shared resources And the final thing is that would like us to try to develop a perspective on potentially having more control over our transit system, and specifically to establish goals and standards for transit in the Boulder Valley, and then a commitment to achieving those aims. And I don't propose that we know enough to say we need our own transit agency, but I do think this is our chance to make that evaluation and bring some options to the table so that the community can really look at it. Thanks.
All right, let's go to Laura online.
Thank you, Erin. And I don't want to be repetitive here. I just want to thank everybody for the really wonderful comments so far, and staff for all of the great work. I want to bring up one thing in the focus areas that was in our previous 10-year BVCP update and has dropped off for this one. And it's not a sexy area that's going to come up organically in community conversation, but it is something that we've been grappling with at Planning Board, which is subcommunities and area planning. And I'm sure that over the next 10 years, this is going to be a big topic. Are we going to continue to do subcommunity and area planning? And what is that going to look like? And how do we use those subcommunity and area plans in a way that is meaningful and that validates the amount of work it takes to produce them? I could say a lot more, but I'm sure that staff and city council are familiar with what I'm talking about here. So I don't know how this feeds into the community conversations, for example, or the analysis that staff needs to do, but I do know that this is something that will be important for the BVCP in the next 10 years. So I wanted to get that into the conversation.
Great, thanks.
And I'll stop there for now. I do have a couple of specific comments, but I think I can just send those to staff offline.
Appreciate that. I'm seeing a few hands raised from people who've already asked questions. I will just note we have 4 minutes left in this section, so if you can keep any follow-up questions quite brief, I'd appreciate it. But Matt has not gone yet, so.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate the opportunity to jump in front from those that had their hands up a little in front of me. One question is sort of follow up on the 15-minute neighborhoods. Is there, and this might be in the community assembly aspect of things, but I'm wondering if there's opportunity or where it fits in to discuss perhaps the tension that's created with 15-minute neighborhoods from an economic development strategy perspective. Because as we look to put people in their neighborhood cores to get more of what they need, that intrinsically means that they have less necessity to go to our downtown core if it's farther from their neighborhood core to seek those needs, and then what impact that perhaps has on our downtown space. And so I'm curious how that works from a comp planning perspective in terms of how do we future vision our downtown core if the neighborhoods are supporting more of the community need versus downtown, and does the downtown core become more tourist focused or still centric? What does that look like? How do we prioritize those things? And then of course, how it ties into the work we're doing with the economic development strategy. So I think there's a tension there that I think needs some discussion or reconciliation on a number of fronts. I'm just wondering if there's opportunity for that to be discussed.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that comment. Absolutely. So later in the when the assembly comes back together again at the end of August, and then through September, as they are learning more and really refining their ideas about what 15-minute neighborhoods are they a good idea? What do they look like in Boulder? That's where they will introduce and have those conversations about the potential trade-offs that are associated with them. So you raise a very good one about just the sort of the economic viability of providing businesses and services within neighborhoods. If you you need a certain amount of people, a certain amount of density that can support those businesses, but also what are some of the ripple effects to other commercial centers that exist within the city? And so that will absolutely be part of that conversation and their deliberations. And I would expect that as part of the report out to all of you, that will happen in October, December. I'll have to look at the calendar. Yeah, December of their work. I feel like that would be an important thing for us to make sure that we are communicating and raising in their final report out is what some of the challenges were that they've talked about and how they would address those going forward.
Appreciate it. My final one is just sort of a question. It's a comment / question. One is I joined Taisha in supporting the ag focus that is brand new and long overdue, given just how much land actually is occupied in ag in our city. So that's tremendous. So I'm appreciative of those voices speaking out, but also that we're responding to that. And I'm curious if if we get into that place of talking about beyond just the land designated as agriculture, but thinking of the peri-urban and urban opportunities for food production or farming, I think Montreal poses an interesting model where they have now zoned most of those rooftops viable for food production and have done so in a very interesting way. They have a similar climate to ours. And so I'm just sort of curious if it expands beyond just the green belt of ag land as we designate it, or more holistically about where some of that can be. So I'm just curious if it's really broad or specific to supporting the farmland as it's currently designated.
Yeah, I would say it's all in the above, and that's part of the conversations we will continue to have. So, the topic of food systems as a broad category is an area of focus, but as we get into the details of the different policy choices, that's where we'll wrestle with some of those decisions.
I've got Nicole, Mark, Claudia, and Tina, but again, encourage brevity.
Thank you. I will be try to be brief and go fast. I just wanted to make a plug for accessibility to think about coming back into the vision, especially given our rapidly aging population. Accessible and equitable opportunity do seem like they're crucial for the top level of our main planning document, because that's where a lot of accessibility shows up. I agree with Lauren about an aspirational statement being okay, and I would love that. It goes along, I think, with our ask to be bold in all of this that I feel like you all are doing so well. The idea of balancing the economy and housing with open space and land felt a little bit contrary to what came out of some of the engagement summaries. So some of the discussions seem to note that these concepts are interdependent and that we will achieve our sustainable, equitable, and resilient goals when they're acting in harmony. So just this idea that housing and jobs don't have to compete with land and open space, but that we can re-envision something different that brings it together, a different model of being. That's one of the pieces of wisdom from the frontline communities that seemed like it represented a really bold focused shift in our thinking. And I really like the phrase leveraging community assets and innovation for future generations, just because it was really active and, again, aspirational. Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, I just have one question, and I'm going back to the staff memo on page 18, which suggests that we explore amending the height limitations in Boulder. In a response to my hotline, it was said that staff are not recommending these policy changes, but rather are requesting confirmation on whether these ideas warrant further study.
So Mark, I apologize. I believe we're talking about this in the next section. Is that right? So we will absolutely have the opportunity in the next section.
I will wait for the next section.
All right. Thanks.
But I will be waiting.
Claudia.
My question was actually a process question, and that was to confirm with staff. I thought, according to your outline for the meeting, we would have time for comments on this section after both presentations. So I recognize we're out of time on this, but I did have comments as opposed to questions, and I was planning on saving those for the later portion of the meeting.
I believe the intention is for these two items to be dealt with at this time, and that we will have comments on the potential concepts to explore in the second half of the meeting. So if you got them, now's the time to lay them out.
Do it now. Oh, Lord. I think Tina is waiting, so I will defer to her.
I'll go while she's getting hers. Mine are pretty simple. I actually like the vision statement. I understood it and read it to be, our vision is to be a welcoming, belonging place in Boulder. But if that doesn't read that way to other people, I think it's great. I really appreciate the simplification of the language. It's really important to me that it can be read easily, especially when people like to scan documents or are not settling down for a good 6 to 8 hours with this comp plan while they're watching Netflix or something. And I think it's a hard document to read. So anything we could do to make it more accessible, just in terms of simplifying language, is great. The other thing is there are a couple terms that I saw that it would be helpful to define maybe in a different way. So under inclusive economy, understanding what does inclusive mean? You know, what is that idea? We use the word inclusive a lot, but we often don't define it. And you know, at some point, trying to understand what would that look like, and try to get some visuals. Another thing would be the word, you know, supporting community-minded businesses. Community-minded is really difficult to understand which community, you know, who's benefiting, what's the target there. So the extent that we can help communicate that to the people who read this document would be great. And then if I have a comment about whether we're looking at housing in the context of student population, is that now or later?
Now would be fine.
Okay,
And I
so
probably will have a quick answer for you.
okay, so I looked at the, you know, I did a hotline. So our population has been flat for the last 10 years. We've gained 9,000 students, which means 9,000 other people are gone. And I hope that when we talk about building and creating a more inclusive community, we understand that a lot of that 9,000 is simply households getting smaller as people left, and we know that. But we also know that the housing type people want, our income commuters have actually increased with the housing we're developed. So we're definitely missing something. So I'd love to see that reflected somewhere in this conversation.
Okay. Claudia?
Okay, so I've cut this down to 2 comments I just want to make about the proposed focus areas. Small things. First has to do with inclusive local economy. And I just noted that the interest that you describe in that particular focus area seems to focus on local businesses and wealth building opportunities. I'm curious if things like workforce issues like wages and housing access should also be part of that conversation as you bring that back to the community. And then comment on the multicultural and multi-generational community. I just want to appreciate seeing this focus area, and I'm really actually glad to see that age is a part of it. I would expect multiculturalism and racial diversity to be part of it, but age is important there too. Because really, as I look at our plans in the city, I think they're often reading as fairly neutral with regards to phases of life, but they often have a hidden bias towards working age adults, and then an absence of children, youth, and elders in the plans. And so given our growing aging population, given our declining youth population, I think both of those conditions suggest we need to do better planning for the whole life course. So I'm really happy to see that multi-generational aspect. And I'll stop my comments there.
Okay, I got a couple more people queued up. Mason, Lauren?
I'll be super quick. Agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said here. So the only thing I wanted that was left in my notes to say is that I see the Boulder Valley Comp Plan as it's largely a guiding document, right? It's the top of the pyramid that everything falls out of. So what I'm not seeing here is more direction about how to, and maybe this isn't the right place for it, but how to actually use the comp plan, what takes priority when we are balancing these sometimes competing values and policies. Maybe we'll get to that later, but I do want to make sure that that's in there. And I agree with Laura's comment around the neighborhood plans. That I think it's going to be really important to have more guidance on how to use these things in practice rather than just be visionary. I do like the idea of having a more visionary vision statement as well, but yeah.
Lauren? I got Laura too.
Thank you. I have a couple of specific things related to the focus sections that I'll follow up later with staff about, but I think the big one that I wanted to introduce, because I don't know, might not get a lot of support, is that I feel like one aspect that's missing to me, especially as sort of we see these changes happening at the federal level, but that also ties to some of local things, has to do with community feedback and free speech. I think we've had a lot of, whether it's at council meetings and people wanting to petition their government versus, feeling safe, and kind of discussion around that within our chambers, to signature gathering and how the legal framework of that and where people are able to do that has changed over time, to kind of what our expectations are for neighborhood plans, for our community feedback, and when outreach and things are expected. I think having a section that maybe speaks to how we go through change in this process might be beneficial.
Okay, got Laura, and then I'll wrap us up.
Thank you. Just really quickly, a couple of specific things for the different focus areas. One thing that is spoken to in the current BVCP, and I think also speaks to our focus areas around climate action and housing choice and opportunity, is landmarking and historic preservation. We have an awful lot of our housing stock, especially that is coming into its being 50 years old and would be eligible for landmarking if it's proposed for redevelopment. And I think we're going to have to grapple with that very seriously in the next 10 years. And I know that our historic preservation staff is thinking hard about an overhaul, basically, of the authorizing legislation for the historic preservation program. It may be helpful to have some guidance in the BVCP about how we see historic preservation for Boulder, right? Like, how much of the city do we want to have preserved? What eras are important to preserve? It's not just every building that's over 50 years old. We already know that. But this may be an area that is ripe for some more high-level guidance. And I do think that speaks to a lot of our goals around providing more housing and compact neighborhoods. And then around the safety goal, we know that we are going to have a municipal airport for the next 10, 20 years. And so this is not about whether we should keep the airport or redevelop it. That's a separate question. We know we need to address the lead emissions from the airport. It's a serious air quality issue. It's a serious human health issue. It also speaks to greenhouse gas emissions. So having some more guidance in the BVCP that directly addresses that problem, I think would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for the ideas and the questions and the comments. And so just turning back to city staff, we've had a lot of great ideas here tonight. Just frame for all of us, you came to us on the basis of over 1,000 community contacts. And like on the vision statement, I think there was 230 specific bits of feedback on that. So just there've been a lot of great ideas here tonight, but we've also heard a lot from the community. So it's a challenging balance to strike. And of course, vision statements are tough because you only got so many words, so you can't pack everything into everything you might want to. So glad this is your problem and not mine. And with that, we'll wrap up this section. I did want to make a quick comment to the audience, just for people who may not be familiar, that our rules of procedure and behavior guidelines call for quiet in the audience. That includes things like snapping or saying words or things like that. If you did want to express some support, you can always use silent jazz hands. And with that, I'll hand it back to you all for the next phase.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Brockett, and thanks for all those comments. We are going to get to the fun stuff of the evening. Hope everyone's ready. I hope I'm ready. So we are excited to move into this next part of the meeting. This is where we begin to be bold, and I will come back to that in a minute. We are going to talk through a set of potential concepts that the project team is proposing that we potentially study further through this next phase of work and have additional conversation with the community. Just from a quick scheduling note, I am going to go through each of the 7 concepts to explore first, and these are organized in no particular order. And then we're going to take a very brief 5-minute break just so everybody has a chance to take a breath, collect their thoughts, and then we'll return and have a brief 10 to 15-minute conversation on each of them. We are going to be handing out a worksheet during that break, so you will all have this worksheet, and then we will ask you to fill that out after the discussion. I'll touch on that in just a few minutes. So before we begin, I did want to provide a little bit of additional background and a few points of clarification. First, I want to just recognize the great work that has gone into the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan over the last 50 years. Most of the policies that are within that existing plan are aligned with our city values. They will be carried forward. They're great. We are certainly going to look for opportunities to consolidate some of those, simplify some of the languages we spoke about to some of those existing policies. But we are absolutely not starting from scratch, and we're not ignoring the last 50 years of community input that have shaped our community. If you remember back in 2024 in October when we kicked off this project, you challenged us, staff, to be bold. I think be audacious may have been Matt Benjamin's quote. So we have identified these several potential concepts to explore that have emerged from that challenge and also through our conversations with community members, with all of our department colleagues, both on the city and county side. Many of us had an opportunity to attend the National Planning Conference a few months ago, which was held in Denver. And so planning experts and practitioners, and then all the conversations we've had with you up to this point. These concepts could ultimately result in a more substantive shift or realignment within the comprehensive plan. So that's why we're putting them forward as do these have legs? Should they remain on the table? Should we explore them further? We are not actually asking for your approval or support of the idea itself tonight. We are just asking, is this a topic that is worthy of additional research and community conversation? The goal being that we can come back to you with more information and more details when you actually do have to make a decision about policy choices and options. Next slide. So pending your feedback tonight, if any of these concepts to explore are supported, we will approach these in 4 different ways through the summer and the fall as we move forward. Anything that has a land use application or implication will be modeled through what we have, what we call the digital twin. We have a GIS-based ArcGIS, ArcUrban digital twin of the city where we can model different land use changes and look at what the potential impacts in a quantitative basis would be. Things like housing opportunities, greenhouse gas emissions, water use, etc. We will also be employing the racial equity instrument to understand how some of these changes might harm or benefit various members of the community. Some of these ideas are totally new to Boulder, and so we will be conducting some case study research and reaching out to other cities where similar policies may have been implemented and to see how they're functioning or maybe not functioning. And then finally, we will incorporate all of this analysis into these upcoming engagement windows through the summer and the early fall to understand what the community's appetite for change is. Next slide. You'll also see that each of the concepts and really most of the policies within the comprehensive plan are multidimensional. They are interconnected, right? We know that if we pull a string on one end, it may start to unravel the other important things on the other end. So to that end, we have highlighted on the side of each of these concepts the different areas of focus that could be influenced by policy changes within that topic. It's really just a visual way for us to link back the concepts for change back to those areas of focus and see how we're starting to think about those and address those. So if everyone is ready, let's dive in. This first concept is focused on the comprehensive plan's future land use map. So I think you all know that this map depicts a plan of what the desired land use pattern should look like in the Boulder Valley. And it's used in a lot of our decision making regarding future code amendments, rezoning applications, development decisions, etc. The team is recommending that we explore how the land use map is created and is represented, particularly the fine-grained approach that is currently in the map, where it applies a different land use designation almost on a parcel-by-parcel basis in some locations. A comprehensive plan, as you know, is supposed to sort of fly at that 30,000 foot level, so is there an opportunity to make this map more generalized and more flexible going forward? Also looking at the number of different designations and the definitions of those different land use categories. Today there are 26 within the plan. There are many of them have overlapping goals and descriptions. As a good example, I think there are 5 or 6 different flavors of mixed use land use. So it can cause a lot of confusion, not only for you, but for community members and for staff as well. And so that is a concept that we are very interested in exploring if you support it. Next slide. This next concept is about exploring the city's physical and geographic composition, both in the horizontal plane and vertical plane. So if this is supported, we envision testing how Area 2, which are those areas that are outside the city limits but are eligible for annexation, and the planning reserve, the Area 3 planning reserve, could potentially support our community needs. As an example, city and county staff have been looking at, what would allowing ADUs across Area 2 look like, and what would be the infrastructure and services needed to support that? Would that help to support the community housing needs really across the valley, even though they are out in the county technically? This section or this concept to explore would also incorporate that second step of the planning reserve process, which is to identify community needs and assess whether those are sufficient to warrant moving to the third step of that process, which was to create a sub-community plan for the planning reserve. I will note that will happen after the comp plan. We will not be able to do that in tandem. We also think it is worthwhile to explore the vertical nature of the city and whether there are strategic adjustments to the height limit, perhaps in key locations or only under certain conditions, could provide additional benefit. Again, we're not necessarily advocating for this, but we think it's worthy of some additional analysis. We also acknowledge that the height limit is codified within the city charter, so any changes to that would require a public vote to change the city charter if the policy discussion actually went in that direction at the completion of the update. The comp plan is really only able to set policy, but it cannot change the height limit on its own. Next slide. This next concept really is less focused on the policies themselves, but how they get implemented into the future. So this term of targeted universalism is what we included in the memo, and it's really more of the academic term that is essentially a commitment to using data to evaluate our choices and how they could benefit or impact different communities within the city. We then use that understanding to help us and help everyone in the community meet a universal goal. So what that means is that some neighborhoods or community members might receive or would need different approaches or support in order to reach that universal goal. In many ways, we're already working in this way. The 2022 Comprehensive Flood and Stormwater Plan took a similar approach and analyzed and ranked all of the potential stormwater projects to determine which can do the greatest good first, right? And then also, if you think about our 6-year capital improvements program process, that also, each of those projects are evaluated against the SER framework, and they are prioritized based on those projects that can meet multiple goals in a single project. So if we were to consider this or move forward with something like this, it essentially would just mean that we would be creating a much more broad sort of application of things that we're already doing across the city. This fourth concept gets to Councilmember Schuhard's idea about transit, and is RTD our only transit provider as we move forward? So this is really an opportunity for us to collaborate with our regional partners to make better progress on major projects and investments. We already do this, and we're very proactive and do a lot of collaborative work with our partners, but really this is an idea that's intended to move toward a specific project or a series of projects that is really focused on the health and wellness of the community on a much longer time frame, a generational scale. So this is about the long game, right? Is there something that the comprehensive plan can initiate within the plan's 20-year horizon that would provide benefits over the next 50 or even 100 years? You can think about the preservation of our rural lands and open space that surround the city. That's a perfect example of a big idea that came about 50 years ago that we still enjoy today. Next slide. This concept is about further exploring what it might take to enhance Boulder's night economy and test whether or not that's a path that the community is really interested in. As I think we've all seen and experienced and really around the country, the rhythm of daily life is changing, and that's partly related to COVID, that's remote work, many other shifts. And this concept would allow us and staff in the community to explore a little bit further about how we might actually capitalize on that shift and expand our social and our economic and our cultural opportunities in a new way. This obviously would have some relevance to related to the arrival of Sundance and also presents an opportunity to more fully engage all of our different age groups and different activities throughout that 24-hour cycle. The next to last concept comes from many community comments about how we think about our natural systems within the city. And this is, you could think of this sort of as the shift between green environmentalism and gray environmentalism, where green environmentalism was kind of the original notion of protecting nature sort of in its place, but then gray environmentalism starts to speak to how do we infuse nature into our urban systems and actually use those not only as amenities, but also as functional elements, particularly within climate change. So this is really kind of a fairly deep and theoretical sort of exploration of how do the existing natural systems that are within our city, how do those move beyond just the beautiful amenities and essential components of the natural ecosystem that they exist today, but how do those begin to play much more of a role in our climate resilience and the overall infrastructure of the city? So this is about reinforcing those healthy natural systems, but also recognizing their value and importance as literally the lungs of the city as the city continues to urbanize and change over time. A couple of examples that we would explore as part of this this concept includes, how our greenway system can evolve beyond what it is today, which is primarily a transportation and a stormwater infrastructure use. How could that become more of a formalized park or a community amenity to people that are living nearby? Looking at strengthening our open space requirements for redevelopment. Again, there's a lot of tension and opportunity between providing redevelopment and housing opportunities, but those housing opportunities need to be livable. They need to be places where people want to actually be, and you need to provide those outdoor spaces for people to thrive. And also nature-based climate solutions. So thinking about our tree canopy, thinking about pollinator gardens and pollinator highways and all these other kinds of things that can be infused within an urban environment that help to make the city a much more living and thriving place beyond just the sort of human-centered functions of the city itself. And then the last one is a nod to Boulder's special vibe. Boulder has a shared history as a place that's a little weird, a little offbeat, a little groovier than your average town. But it's really building on our community's historic assets, our local oddities. We would examine the ways that Boulder can enhance the physical environment and our social fabric and the economic engines that make this such a unique place, both in Colorado and really the nation. We know that bringing back the funky in Boulder we're not trying to recreate the past. It's certainly not something that's possible or even desired. What we're talking about and what we're thinking about is how do we create opportunities for innovation, creativity, and ingenuity that reinforces what makes Boulder so special as it continues to evolve and change over time. So now that we've had a brief sort of summary and overview of each of those concepts, as I mentioned, we're going to take just a brief break, about 5 minutes. When we come back, we are going to have about an hour and a half, 90 minutes, or about 10 to 15 minutes per concept for some clarifying questions and brief discussion. Unfortunately, just given the size of the group, we're not going to have time for everybody to comment on every concept. So use your time wisely. We will keep our responses brief. That's my guarantee to you. And at the end of the discussion, I mentioned we are going to pass out a worksheet for all of you. So for each concept, after we have that discussion, you're going to take that worksheet and we're asking you specifically, should that topic or should that concept be taken off the table and not explored? Would it be a nice to have? Would it be nice to explore if we have time to do that? Or is the topic critical and absolutely needs to be explored further as we move through the process? So there's also space for you to add some guardrails around the concept if you feel like that's necessary. We are going to collect those worksheets at the end of the meeting, and we will include those in the meeting summary that we will circulate, in a couple of weeks at your next city council meeting, so that they're part of the public record as we go forward. And we will make sure to get a response from Laura and online as well. So with that, we are going to take a 5-minute break.
Short break. Emphasis on the word short. Okay, I hope everyone is feeling tanned, rested, and ready for the second half of our exciting program. So, KJ, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yes. Okay. So, as I mentioned, thank you for that brief little break. Hopefully, you're feeling refreshed and recharged. We have these two questions for you. Really, I think the goal of these brief 10 to 15-minute discussions around each concept is let us answer any clarifying questions that you may have. Again, I mentioned we'll keep our answers brief, and then be thinking in your mind, or even introduce as part of your discussion. Is this something that we should continue to go down the path and explore? Is it something that it's interesting but not critical, or is it something that we can take off the table and focus our energy on other elements? So, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor Brockett.
Okay, great. And can I get a request to maybe throw a few pens out on the table for those of us who did not
Yes,
arrive
we
with a pen?
have a
Oh,
whole
we're
bag.
prepared. Look at that.
We have a whole bag.
Okay.
And
Well,
if it's
we got a bunch coming over this way.
if it's helpful for me to bring up the slide of the concept that we're discussing,
That would
can
be
do that.
yeah. If you can please bring those up one at a time.
Great.
Okay. So, all right, settle down, everybody. I don't want to have to start assigning demerits to people. So we got a few things here. We were looking at 10 to 15 minutes each. That means that we don't all have a chance to speak to everyone. So if somebody's already said your thought, great. Or if there's a thought that maybe isn't critical, maybe we leave that behind. So what I'll do is for each of these, I will open up the floor for clarifying questions, and we can rocket through those. And then once those are done, I'll ask if people have a few brief comments to offer about whether we take these up or not. So our first one is exploring revisions to the future land use designations and map. Any clarifying questions on this one? And remember, raise your hand up high. Tara.
What do you mean by that?
So,
Exactly.
KJ.
What do we mean by revisions to the future land use map? So through this, staff would explore both the designations themselves and the definitions. So we'd look at those 26 different categories, look at ways to collapse some of those or combine certain ones, redefine them. And then also the land use map, we would also start to explore and investigate different ways to sort of organize the land uses on the map. So primarily, we're going to have a core downtown. There's going to be some commercial nodes or other things, but we would also look at, are there areas that we should perhaps change the land use designation? And that'll be part of our kind of land use alternatives analysis. And then we'll be able to determine what does that look like in terms of the number of housing units or job opportunities or greenhouse gas emissions? Does that reduce traffic or increase traffic? Those kinds of things.
So the question was, is that something you think we should do? These are all things you think are worth exploring.
Yes.
Check.
Okay. Yeah. Nicole?
I just have one question here. One thing we've heard a lot about over the years is how long some of our planning process takes, especially for folks who are trying to change something. So say there's a commercial space that's not being used, they would like to change it into something else. Is that something that would fall into this bucket?
Yes. I said I'd be brief. No, that would be, we would incorporate that as we look at the definitions of the different land use categories to see if we can build in additional flexibility with still being true to what the designation is itself.
Thank you. And Aaron, would you like me to include my comment here and then I'll be quiet for the rest of this one?
I think we're going to do questions first, then comments. So, Mason.
Sorry, I have a process question. I came prepared a little differently with ideas under each of these that I would like to be explored, and I'm seeing only a place to write guardrails. Should I just go ahead and include those there anyway?
That'd be great. Yes.
And then if you have a guardrail that's overarching, do I just maybe blank space?
That would be great. Yeah,
okay,
that would be fine. Thanks.
Tina.
Quick question: would some of the would it possible that there would then be impacts, sort of following up on what Laura was talking about, to the sub-community plans in this?
No, not necessarily. So sub-community and area plans look at obviously a smaller geographic area than the city itself. Those would still be effective tools that take the broad citywide policies of the comprehensive plan and translate those down to more site-specific or area-specific policies. So that those are definitely still part of the toolbox of planning.
Right, I'm not seeing any other hands raised for questions, so any comments on this one? Nicole? Then Claudia.
Thank you. I really love this idea because a big question that's on my mind right now is how we maximize adaptability. We saw this with our COVID response. It helped us move quickly in that case. We've got a climate crisis, economic crisis, federal government is kind of in chaos. It really means that flexibility is going to be key. And so what I really like about this idea is that it seems to open up a place for us to be more goal-oriented rather than fine-grained, and really think flexibly and adaptably on how we can maximize that for the next couple decades.
Claudia.
Okay, so I'm also really glad that you are going to be re-examining the map, not just updating what's there, but thinking about how it's made and for what purpose. I actually see two problems with the map that we have currently. First of all, as you mentioned, it's very fine-grained. That makes it difficult to shape change in the future, particularly when it's coupled with a private land market where we don't have any control over which parcels are coming up for redevelopment at any given time. But second, I think this map that we have is primarily descriptive of our present reality, and it tends to have the impact then of conserving rather than evolving the city. So following on from what Nicole said, working towards a more flexible, adaptive map. That might mean having fewer categories. It might mean having different geometries, like thinking in terms of nodes rather than polygons like you see on the map, fuzzy boundaries and things like that. So yeah, I'd be happy to see changes here.
Lauren and then Mark.
Thank you. I agree with both what Nicole and Claudia have said. And I would just encourage you to go far with this. Like, you know, if there's 26 categories, we should be looking at like 10 or fewer. Like, really go far. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. So just for everyone's knowledge, we use the current map at every decision, every quasi-judicial decision we make. Use tables, use reviews, site reviews, and it's essential. And so updating it to me seems completely essential, and rethinking it is also essential. Also, as two people have said, simplification is great. The city tends to put far too fine a point on our planning documents, in our use tables and everything. It feels sometimes like a Russian central control kind of economic document. So simplification and broadening and creating greater flexibility would be greatly appreciated.
All right, Ryan?
I agree with everything that colleagues have said so far, and just on the subject of polygons and nodes and how to think about mapping, I would just point out that the idea of travel time of getting from a place to the things you need, whether it's a grocery store, cafe, or whatever, that is also another framework that could be part of this, and I do look very much forward to seeing. And then also, I don't know if wildfire, wildlands, that is meant to be a part of this, but Nicole's comment about thinking about our climate future makes me think, in fact, maybe that does make a lot of sense. And considering that, do we have a false sense of precision in some cases when we look at maps as we currently understand them with wildfires, when you think about high winds and so on. So if there's a chance to look at that here as well, it would make a lot of sense to me. Great.
All right, I'm not seeing any more hands. Great job, everyone, in being succinct. So let's move on to item number 2. So this is reconsidering the physical composition of the city, both in terms of Area 2 and the planning reserve and possible adjustments to the height limit. Clarifying questions? Kurt?
Just to verify, when you're talking about the height limit, you're talking about the height limit in the charter, not the height limit in the zoning code.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I see another clarifying question. Claudia?
Yeah, so again, in regards to the height limit, you call that out as one particular form of physical composition. I think that's triggering to a lot of people in the community. It's also only one of the many dimensions of development intensity. Is there a reason that things like floor area ratio, lot size, and setbacks are not included in this topic?
Partly only because that gets into a level of detail that we typically don't touch on within the comprehensive plan, but certainly I think the sort of broad conversations around the level of intensity within different areas, and that would also relate back to that, the land use map changes, that would absolutely be included in these analyses. That's right.
Okay. Can I make my comment at this point, Aaron? And then I'll be
I'm doing
quiet.
questions first, if you don't mind. Matt?
My question centers around if we were to say hold off on testing how Area 3 and the area or Area 2 and Area 3 Planning Reserve could support communities, would that effectively halt our pursuit of annexing and that process of Area 3? Because I just want to know, like, is this sort of extra or is this actually a functional, necessary step in the other side of talking about Area 3?
We have already committed to doing that community needs analysis, the step 2 of the planning reserve process as part of the comp plan. So that will carry forward regardless of any further sort of study and expansion on this.
So this is just added on top of, or
right? Well, the basically the study of the planning reserve and the community needs, that will happen regardless of this. You know, if everybody doesn't support this, then we will still have to go forward with that because we have committed to that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Nicole, question?
Yep, quick question. Can you just explain a little bit more about what if anything, is within the scope of this height limit thinking right now? I mean, are we talking about like just adjustments like we sometimes make where you get an extra floor for something, or are we talking about like 12-story buildings?
Staff have not made any presumptions around that, and that would be helpful from the guardrail perspective. I think that's where we would be interested in knowing. Are you talking like all bets are off, or are is this your guidance would help us focus our efforts on? Might that be appropriate in only specific locations or only under certain conditions? Only up to 5 extra feet, 10 extra feet, those kinds of things. We have not made any assumptions around what that looks like yet, but as part of the process, if you all support us moving forward, we would sort of create a range of analyses. We would not just create one option. We would look at a whole range of different things as part of that discussion.
Tina.
I have a naive question. When CU buys land in the city, does it automatically get exempt from the height limit as the new owner?
I don't know if I know the answer of that off the top of my head. I would assume the answer is yes.
I could. I mean, they are, as a state entity, exempted from all of our land use regulations, including the height limit. So when CU owns a property, they are exempt from all of those regulations.
Right, so and that includes new purchases that they do?
Yeah, whenever, any parcel they own, whether they've owned it for a long time or a short time.
Oh, and can we just clarify this part about the Area 2 and Area 3?
Mm-hmm.
What would be different that we would do in the first one that isn't being done by the separate parallel Area 3 thing?
Analysis? Yeah, so that actually what's referenced here in terms of the Area 3 Planning Reserve, that would essentially look exactly the same. What we're referencing here in terms of looking at Area 2, that's a newer idea where that would require collaboration with the county, because those lands are out in the county. To they're thinking about, are there ways that those county areas that are so closely associated with the city, even though they're not part of the city technically, are there ways that those areas can help contribute to meet some of our community needs? So that's something we haven't explored and maybe wouldn't necessarily go down that road unless there's consistent support from all of you to carry that forward. But the planning reserve work that we'll be doing that would be part of this would look the same regardless of whether all those other elements carry forward or not. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, ML and then Taisha.
Thank you. So Christopher, my question is, in this reconsidering the physical composition, would this be a place where it would be appropriate to start articulating 15-minute neighborhoods?
To some degree, but I think that would actually probably be more relevant in the first one related to some of the land use composition. And again, there's going to be a bit of a back and forth and an iterative process with what we're learning from the assembly and their level of support for that. But certainly 15-minute neighborhoods and sort of the proximity of goods and services to where people live, and also amenities, things like parks and transportation opportunities, things like that. So all that's going to be sort of embedded within a lot of these concepts.
So looking for the opportunities for defining 15-minute neighborhoods will be in the process of looking at the land use map?
To a degree. I mean, we don't want to get too far ahead of the assembly in terms of what their recommendations are going to be, but certainly that'll be in the back of our mind, and that'll be something we're always considering, because it is actually current policy that we look at those opportunities. So we will be embedding that through the analysis.
Thank you.
Taisha and then Lauren.
So when, excuse me. So when we were planning, when we were having conversations about Area 3, and the first step was very human-centered, which was to determine the percentage of commercial, residential, open space, and parks. And I asked about habitat and if a new habitat analysis had been conducted to inform those. And at that time, I was informed that although existing extant information that was available was used to inform, there had been no new analysis since the 1990s when it was originally purchased.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I asked, well, how do we change that? I was informed that this is the place where that it's the Boulder Valley Comp Plan that drives that, and some of our other plans. And so I'm just trying to figure out if it's here that we talk about, reimagining and redesigning urban planning so that it is inclusive, so that habitat is as important as humans in our design, which currently that is not how it is. So so my question is this the place that it happens, or was it the previous one? Similar to the question that I had around, that first planning process talks about grocery stores, but it doesn't talk about food systems in any other meaningful way. And so again, when do we talk about, the core anchors, the guiding, macro level of planning and the order?
Sure. So for the planning reserve proper, that 500 acres that's on the north side of the city, that first step was around, the level of service and infrastructure that would be required, right? Mm-hmm. The second step is to assess community need, and that is the process that is incorporated here into the comp plan update, where there are 3 criteria to determine whether or not the community need is sufficient to warrant moving forward with the third step. And the third step is called a service area expansion plan, which maybe we can change the name of that so it's a little easier to say, but essentially that's a sub-community plan for the planning reserve itself. And that's where you get into the real details about what is the vision for this place. We're still sort of at that moment of, is it even feasible, or is it even desired by the community to move into that space? And then when we get into that third step of the sub community plan, that's where we'd have those conversations around vision.
I'm not asking you what the process is. I'm asking, where do we decide? Where do we revisit that process? And if that's the process that we want to use? Because my concern is you don't wait until step 3, being a former commissioner for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, to determine the things that we would determine at that step. That would normally be something you would assess in step 1 to even determine the level and percentages. So my question is, at what stage of this process would that type of conversation occur? Because when I asked about it then, it was this plan that was the gatekeeper for us to be able to make those changes. So I'm fine with the process as is. My question is, if the city had decided to get additional land, let's just say, right, we would be beholden to the current process if there's not a place where we revisit that process. And so I'm just asking, at what point? If not now, that's fine. I just need to know, and I, again, make the point that there are some structural changes that I would love for us to explore and address related to urban planning and climate and, environmental sustainability. And so that's really where I'm trying to get clarity on when are we going to be able to have those types of process conversations.
Yeah, and I misunderstood your question. So
That's
yes,
okay.
the procedures for the planning reserve, those are codified, or those are included in the comprehensive plan. So if those procedures are to change, now is the time. That's right. As part of this update,
Okay.
as part of this process, that's when we can entertain changes to the procedures appendix or section of the document to change
And would it
those.
be in these types of concepts that this, or is there another place within the plan that this will come to the
It's
fore?
probably a little bit later in the process, I would
Okay.
imagine, because we'll be focused over the summer and fall sort of on the larger policy and really trying to reach some preferred options and consensus within the community about policy. But then the procedures to implement those things, that'll probably come a little bit later, maybe by the end of the year, but certainly early next year,
Okay.
before we draft the plan itself.
Okay. And then for the definitions question, there was a double entendre around like open space. So open space means X during when we're talking about open space and planning, but it means something different in the built environment. So is that something that would be addressed when you were talking about definitions before?
I don't know if I fully understand, but certainly, so capital O open space,
Yeah,
right?
that's the one.
Yeah, so
Are we
capital
gonna
O-
address that
Yeah,
somewhere?
capital O open space owned by the city exists mostly out in the county. That would be conversation more around that, the food systems and how agriculture
It was
is.
more so just clarifying the term
Yeah.
so we're not using big
Yeah.
O and little o for
Correct.
something that's
Yeah.
totally different. So
Yeah.
I'm just, again, my question is where that part's gonna happen and just making sure I don't wanna miss a step.
Sure.
I can just envision months from now, somebody being like, well, we talked about this 3 months ago,
Right,
and
right,
I
right.
can just see this happening. So
Right.
that's why I'm asking very specific questions right now.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to that in a couple more of these down where we're talking about the sort of natural systems in the city. But you're right, I used the term open space when related to redevelopment. That was little o open space. I should call that green space or just outdoor areas. Yeah, that's great. It's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. That's right.
Okay, I got Lauren, and then we can move to comments.
Is this the section where we might also, or that might include something like strengthen or reducing barriers to annexation if there's a strong equity component? For instance, I think about our mosque that doesn't have access to water tap. And is this an area where we might be able to address?
Yeah, I do think that we, through this process, we could look more closely at areas that are designated as Area 2 currently that are directly adjacent to the city and have those conversations with our county colleagues as well about there are a number of annexation policies in the comp plan, as you well know, and also other procedures in the back of the document. So those conversations could be part of this discussion around. There's a lot of Area 2 properties out there that have been Area 2 for 20, 30, 40 years. Will they ever annex in? Should they still remain Area 2? I think there's some kind of fundamental questions around that as well that we could look into.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll move to comments. I will note, I imagine we all have opinions on the height limit, but I would invite, let's say, maybe a small handful of comments, and then the record will be writing down what you think on the sheet. So we do not need to get all of our opinions out into the ether tonight. But I know Mark will say a few words.
It's finally my turn. I wish you had been a little less bold with respect to your height limitation suggestion. The height limits in Boulder are a fundamental and core value. This is tantamount to suggesting that we sell open space in order to build 15-minute walkable neighborhoods. It's a suggestion, but it's not a very good one. I question whether you would get support for this notion from council, but even if you did, I know that you would get a very dim reception in the community for this. if you really want to go that route and put this up for a charter vote, be my guest. It will be a very instructive lesson. And if you've, in terms of the impact of doing this, if you've lived in a true urban environment, you know that higher floors are more expensive. They either rent higher or they sell higher. We would not be building housing in Boulder that's contributing to the community in terms of affordability. We would simply be building the most expensive housing there is in Boulder. And so I think this is let me be kind and say, an idea that we should not pursue. That's not what I wanted to say, but I think it is ill-founded. It will be very, very poorly received by this community, and I urge you not to go there.
A couple other thoughts on this matter. I got Mark.
I'm gonna, yeah. Oh, am I cutting? Okay, all right. I'm gonna limit my comments just to the height limit and say that, yes, I concur that going for a vote regarding height limits might be perilous. However, changing our height limits to allow different roof forms that are treated with the same respect, variability as mechanical screening. Right now, you can build, if you get an exemption and you go to 55 feet, you can go much higher than that with ugly mechanical screening. If you want to build a building that has a roof form that hides those mechanical screens, then you're subject to the height limit. So if this is an opportunity to create a better built environment that's more visually pleasing, that supports the community's goals of our built environment and architectural design, if this is the place to do it, then I'm all for it.
I got Claudia and Tina and Ryan.
Sorry, I tried to jump the gun with my comment earlier. It's also about height. I definitely would like you to study physical composition in what goes forward, but I do think you should be very careful with one-dimensional discussions of development intensity, and height is that one dimension. I think height is not the only tool that we use to make and experience places in the real world. And I think if you do want to explore this with physical composition, we will get much better outcomes with a conversation that includes other levers such as floor area ratio, lot sizes, and setbacks, not just height, regardless of its merits.
Tina, then Ryan, then Matt.
Yeah, I just had a quick process question. You just referred to our worksheet as a record. Is it a record or is this just a worksheet? So these.
Yes, we'll collect those at the end of the meeting and then include them in the public record in our meeting summary. That will come to you in a couple of weeks.
I just wanted to make sure people knew that would be available for the community.
Yes, absolutely.
Terrific, thank you. Yes, I don't think discussing the height limit would be productive, but if it's the will of the rest of the group, of course, that's fine. And I'm good with looking at the Area 2 and Area 3, and also look forward to the separate Area 3. One of my key questions is how changing the use on Area 2 and 3, how close it gets to our service levels, meeting our water service levels, and how would it impact infill development? If we took water for here, would it impact our ability to fully do the infill piece and understanding that balance?
Ryan and then Matt.
I'm thinking about the goals that would organize this, and I think it would be helped to make sense of why would we be talking about the height limit if we were maybe talking about what goals we're trying to achieve in order to accomplish that. So one of the obvious goals to me would be to develop more attainable and affordable diverse forms of infill middle housing. And that ideally would lead the assessment of, well, what are options for doing that? And there's probably other goals that should be a part of this, but I think it's a little, the 55-foot height limit is a lightning rod without us saying, why are we talking about this to begin with? So I propose that it would benefit from some goals, and I would offer the one that I just said. And then when I think about Area 3, I've been, I've had an impression that it's a little bit hard to put Area 3 into a wider context of what we're trying to achieve, at least with where we've been so far. And I think this might be a nice way to say, at least to the extent that Area 3 might be something that could provide diverse infill middle housing, and it might provide some certain number of those units, maybe it's 4,000 or 5,000 or whatever, then to ask the question, what is the most cost-effective and otherwise beneficial way to put that housing into the city of Boulder? And if it turns out that adjusting the height limit by 3 feet and then we don't need to develop a greenfield out in Area 3, that would be a consideration we might want to make. Of course, that's just a crude example, but it does make sense to me that we would be open-minded if we have goals in mind that we're trying to achieve, and then bringing about options for those outcomes.
Matt, then Laura, and then I'll call myself.
I appreciate it. I'll just touch on the height limit stuff. I think to the lightning rod issue, I think we should just be clear in our comms that maybe perhaps we're not making a decision on a wholesale removal of the height limit just to lower the temperature and maybe reduce the emails coming in to council and perhaps planning board, which would be quite beneficial. I will say that I agree with where Mark McIntyre was going with this, which is the thought about targeted and not just the roof and sort of thinking about the screening, but also in terms of different uses on the roof. As I mentioned earlier, thinking about peri-urban or urban agriculture. I mean, maybe those are new things and we think about community benefit in which we give those exemptions. Or, right, you could even put a rail for a rooftop at 55 feet for a restaurant. So there's these sort of silly things that get in our own way. And I could see us getting more creative about how we create those allowances, again, for the community benefit for rewarding height for folks. So I think there's some places to be more targeted.
Laura.
Thank you. So I'll just say about Area 2, in my opinion, I don't think this is a really fruitful area for us to spend time on, given all the other things we want to do in this particular update. Area 2 is already an area that is able to annex if the property owner wants to. And so I would be very cautious about, for example, allowing ADUs wholesale in Area 2, because that might affect a property owner's desire to annex into the city. Usually people annex into the city because they want to get on city water, city services. And when they do that, we are able to negotiate to get an additional housing benefit. We usually insist upon that. So for example, we just had an annexation where somebody kept their single family home, but then devoted half of their land to multifamily middle income housing. I would not like to see our leverage for doing that go away because we're allowing more housing into Area 2 without the annexation. So I would just be really cautious about what that might look like. I'm not saying I'm totally against it, but for me, this is not the one I'm most interested in exploring. With regard to the height limit, I just want to add an exclamation point to what Mark McIntyre and Matt Benjamin just said. I don't think a lot of people understand that our current height limit is 55 feet, but you can put rooftop appurtenances like for building air filtration and air conditioners and stuff on the roof and then shield them. And I think that goes up to what, like 12 feet or 15 feet above that 55 feet. But you cannot put an elevator or a staircase, a stairwell on the roof, even though you already have these rooftop appurtenances up there. So people have a hard time accessing the roof, and you can't use it for things like green roofs, community gardens, pools, have shade structures, use it for recreation and other amenities, even though we already have stuff up on that roof. So I think that is one small tweak that I think the community might find interesting. I definitely find it interesting. And I think this is a great topic for that statistically valid survey. Okay, let's get a wide range of options out there, ranging from the very small tweaks to maybe something a little bit bigger, and get a real sense of community feedback, because we know we're going to get strong opinions on both sides, but we don't have a sense of what percentage of the community is in each of those buckets. And a statistically valid survey, which we're going to do for this plan, would be an excellent opportunity to test some of that out. So I'm very supportive of making this an item that we go to the community and say, hey, what do you think?
Thanks, Laura. I'll call on myself. And I was going to address Area 2 as well. And you had an excellent comment in there. I was going to say I did find it as an intriguing possibility for the Area 2 neighborhoods that are fully developed. So where they're, you think about Gun Barrel or just north of Northfield Commons, where there is an additional development potential, maybe less incentive for some of the things that Laura was talking about. And if the county were interested in allowing ADUs, which if they annex, they'd be able to have them too, I don't know. So that seemed like a potentially intriguing option. All right. That was my bit. I'm going to ask us to move on. We were definitely a little slower there, guys, pals, but it did have the word height limit in it in the discussion. So that phrase doesn't occur in the other item. So we'll see. All right, so next we have the consider a needs-based approach to policy implementation, also known as targeted universalism. Questions on this topic? And, yep, Kurt?
It seems like this is a different term for just data-based equity or something like that. I'm trying to understand why we're using this new terminology that nobody, or I shouldn't say nobody, I have never heard of. And it seems like it might be fairly confusing.
Yeah, I mean, if we do move forward with this, we will certainly look at the language we're using when we communicate this out to the community. I think partly we use that language in the memo just because it is a sort of academic concept, and we wanted to make sure that we were referencing that specifically. But you're right. I mean, fundamentally, what we're talking about here is this needs-based approach and using data to do that analysis and incorporate that into our decision making, so that we are, tailoring the implementation of our policies to different groups so that everybody has a chance to, to meet that universal goal.
Yeah, Mason, Nicole.
This is it might just be being dense question, but I'm confused as to why this is a topic for additional. I thought this was just part of what we do. Yeah.
That's great. That's great feedback. And if it falls off the list, that potentially opens up flexibility for other items as well.
Nicole, and then Laura, and then Taisha.
Yeah, I had sort of a similar question to Mason's, which is just how does this play out? Like, how does this policy concept? What does it sort of look like? What are the kinds of things that you might explore? And then I've got one more question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the difference here is that we have embedded this culture of equity in a lot of our decision making, and we've done that through the SER framework. We've done that in a number of our kind of individual plans or opportunities. I think what this is envisioning is that this becomes essentially a core policy and a core value that begins to apply completely citywide, and it helps to sort of sort of fundamentally, I think, formalize this as a policy within the comprehensive plan, where today it doesn't really exist.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And so targeted universalism was a new term for me for this concept, and I love this concept. I think we've talked about it a lot in council. I'm sure planning board has too. I just wanted to throw out some examples and see if this is the kind of just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. So, one of the things I think about is the earpieces that we have on the dais and how that helps, right? It was specifically for folks who have a harder time hearing, but I use those too. They're actually useful for everybody if there's a little noise or a quieter speaker. So that one, I mean, the other thing that I was thinking about is how some of our presentations and council meetings are starting to shift. So having fewer words on slides, having shorter memos, having more structured questions, those are things that help folks who have ADHD or dyslexia or things like that. They actually seem like they're good for everybody. Are those kind of in that camp?
Yeah, I would include those, and then in terms of some of the more physical implementation of our CIP projects and where those are located, where our major investments are located within the city, how those get applied. Another example I believe that we read in the literature was originally the notion of accessibility and wheelchair access ramps on sidewalks, right, and eventually people realize that that's actually great for children and people that are temporarily, disabled from an injury or something like that. And so, thinking about those ways that we can improve the city and improve the way we implement projects so that they disproportionately help those people that need it most, but also it's good for everybody.
Okay, thank you. And So just another kind of example, but I can actually save this for a comment, Aaron, if that's more helpful.
Okay, Laura has got her question answered, so Taisha.
Thank you very much. I echo my colleagues' questions about the term. And again, as somebody who's been working in equity since the 90s, this term is not actually new. It's just a remix of terms that we've used many times in the past. And I'll save my rest of comments for later on that. But I do have questions around, I noticed the identifying most and least served, which is great. But I was also curious if this would be inclusive of the actual policy responses and resource allocation and assessing the quality of the work we do, based on, it's great to know what the outcomes are, and we know what they are. That's water is wet research. But I'm just curious if there was also conversations around studying the actual policies that were implemented and the effects of the policies that the city is administering, as well as the amount of resources that are being used. So indicators like workforce composition, pay equity, promotion rates, recruitment rates, retention rates, those kinds of components. I saw other tools used, but just in general, just trying to get a hand around the governance and accountability components.
Yeah, what I would say is responsibly governed is one of our core goals of the SER framework, and this, at least the way we'd been envisioning, this would be focused more on sort of citywide policy that applies to the community, and maybe less so internally to our city operations, but certainly there are other tools and other things that, if this becomes a core policy of the city and of the comprehensive plan, our internal operating documents also are consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that would be something that would get incorporated as well.
Okay, and then does this, is this the area that would include issues like repair, reparations, and reconciliation from the Colorado Racial Equity Study that's happening for Black Coloradans? There's specific information around Boulder and Boulder, the city of Boulder specifically. I'm also thinking about the Tribal Reconciliation Education Commission's report on the historic land loss and the 300 million that would just be the city of Boulder land. That doesn't include water or agriculture. So just curious, where would that fall in our being a welcoming and inclusive and vibrant community?
I don't know if we would get into that level of detail in terms of this particular policy, but it's something, it's something we could do some additional research on and try to incorporate.
Great. All right, let's move to comments. If we have a few comments on this one. I think we got Laura and then Nicole and Tina.
Thank you. So I also had the question of why this would need to be a comp plan item. I mean, I don't know what kind of research or community engagement you would need to do on this. I think it's very broadly supported. And so maybe this is just one of those other items that isn't like a focus area or a big concept to explore, but it's just kind of something that we do because we all support it. But I do want to say that calling it targeted universalism to me feels like it could have the perverse impact of redirecting resources towards parts of our community that are not underserved. So for example, there's less transit in some of the single family neighborhoods, but there's also less demand for transit way out on the fringes of the city where folks usually have cars. I don't know that those are the neighborhoods that need the most access to transit right now, but that could be driven by something that looks like everybody should have equal access to everything kind of policy. The memo also talked about how our communities that score highest on the racial equity index in terms of needing services already tend to be located closest to things like public libraries and recreation centers. I would not want to see something like targeted universalism drive resources away from those community members. So I would just be cautious. Do we need to call it that? Because I feel like it could be misinterpreted and misused.
I get Nicole and Tina.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm actually really excited about thinking how we can expand this idea a little bit more across the city. And I fully support moving forward with this as a policy concept to explore. The fact that the frontline communities were specifically asking for this to be a policy change makes me think that it's something that they are still feeling we could move farther on in a way that would make a difference. One of the things that came to mind as I was just reading through this part of the memo was the degree to which this concept would be so helpful for our city in the ways we're trying to get the county to help us a little bit more with unsheltered homelessness specifically. This is a place where we are the frontline community in the county. We are experiencing the biggest impacts of this issue right now in the city. We're really struggling with it. And helping us is actually going to help everybody. If we could kind of, as a region, invest in strategies that are going to help here, it will help everyone. And so I think about this approach as being such a crucial one. And that specific issue is one where we are noticing the lack of it in our regional approach to a really challenging problem. So I do think that this would be a transformational move for the city, and would love to see how some of the groups engaged see this as expanding.
Tina and then Tara.
Yeah, I appreciate both Laura and Nicole's comments. And the one caution I have is we've invested a lot talking about the SER framework and the equity instrument. And I don't want us to have ideally too many overlapping definitions and frameworks, because it could get confusing pretty quickly. If we do go down this route, to try and clarify what we're doing when. And so I understand that sometimes, yes, a layered approach is good, but I feel like this is getting very wordy for doing some similar activities.
Tara?
After Googling and studying targeted universalism today and yesterday, I really do like this idea, and I'm segueing or colloquying off of, I don't know if you guys use that word in planning board, what Nicole said. If you would say to the county, for instance, well, Boulder should get more help with those experiencing homelessness, they would say, well, that's not fair. We have all these other counties. But in reality, we're one of the counties that are the most affected. So to me, targeting means that whoever is the most effective, they get the resources. And so there's a little bit of nuance there that I appreciate and I think could be good for the city. And I also agree that it will be good for everybody.
All right. Okay, Mark, and then we'll wrap up.
Taisha's also.
Oh,
I only
Taisha.
did the questions on the first one. Thank you.
I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, just very quickly, I want to support those who have a little problem with the terminology. I interpret this as simply equitable distribution of services. People, I think, would understand that. This is a specified term, and people are going to need to know it. I think we're overcomplicating things. We want equity in how we perform and how we deliver services to our population. I don't know that the special term of targeted universalism is going to resonate with large portions of the community, and an even larger portion is probably likely to say, what is that? And I think it's just a little bit too far for me. Thanks.
Taisha, and then we'll move on.
Yes, just very briefly, since my colleagues have pretty much said similar things. We've worked so hard to get people to understand what equity is, and we still don't even have a strong definition for that. I have significant concerns around adding additional language that would then require more accountability, and we haven't even been able to identify and do the work around equity. So I just, it just feels very confusing, and I'm hopeful that we can lean into the words that we've invested in. I understand, obviously, there's federal funding implications to the words that we use. That's real, and I can honor that. But I also don't want to pull back on all the work and investments that we've made to get here. Thank you.
All right, thanks. We'll move on to the next one. And I will note that we continue to fall behind. So let's try to exercise our succinctness muscles here. And our next one is collaborate with regional partners to make community investments. Questions? Mark?
How are we not doing this right now?
Yeah, I mean, we are doing this right now, but I do think that this was really intended to kind of think big and broadly and try to identify a big bold idea that we can have that collaborative discussion around. You know, thinking about alternative energy systems or regional transit systems, things like that. I mean, I think this is really. This is an idea that we're already pursuing. It's something that we already do, but this is leaning into it a little bit further of like, what are those big things that maybe we could do at a regional scale that that we should continue to move towards and actually to document within the comprehensive plan.
Other Mark?
Okay, will you be considering transformative healthcare projects such as mental illness treatment, drug addiction treatment? You know, we need a facility badly somewhere in the county. That would seem to me to be something you might want to take a look at.
Yeah, I think that could absolutely be added to the topics of to be explored. Yeah, thank you.
Mason?
Similar to first Mark's question, how does focusing on this help you all get to those bigger, because you're already working on this, so I'm trying to understand, like, how does focusing on this help you all get to those big ideas?
Well, I mean, part of it is, you know, there's policies in the comp plan today that speak to the fact that we're going to collaborate with Boulder County and our regional partners on a number of different things, but there's nothing specific to say we are going to collaborate on, you know, X project, right? And so this would really be, I think, an effort to conceptualize what that project is, but then also have conversations with our county colleagues and see if there is support from their side as well, that, yeah, that's something we should focus on over the next 20 years and really work towards implementing that.
I guess I'm still struggling with how this is different than what's happening. Like what I'm hearing is, and let me know if I'm incorrect, is comp plan before was vague. We didn't quite have the direction we need. This will allow us to have more direction and maybe better focus what we're doing. Is that the right interpretation?
I'd say overall, but also just trying to put a finer point on, you know, is there a major significant investment that both ourselves and our regional partners can all agree that we're going to focus on and actually implement over the next 20 years? Does that help?
Lauren, and then Nicole, and then Matt.
It seems like similar to having overlapping plans. I have a little bit of concern with this one around, you know, we already have our intergovernmental affairs committee and our packet of information that talks about, you know, we recently chose to include some strategizing with the county, and in that, why is the comp plan the right place for having another version of that? And how do we deal with, I mean, it feels like those conversations shift more quickly than a 20-year time frame. So what was the thinking there with
Well, I mean, I think,
it
yeah, I
specific
mean,
to this?
partly the thinking is that the comprehensive plan is a jointly adopted plan between city and county. So this is the opportunity, or a opportunity, for us to really draw the line in the sand and fully commit on both sides, city and county, to move towards something, whatever that would be. Again, we have policies about collaborating, and I know there's other mechanisms and other ways that we do that. This was just an idea that, is there something that could be formalized through the comp plan? We would take that opportunity.
Nicole, then Matt, then Kurt, then Tina.
So this is kind of a similar question to Councilmember Wallach, and just saying that because there's two Marks in the room right now. I would also love to consider a regional collaboration on issues like homelessness and behavioral health. And if things like that are on the table, thinking back to our presentation from youth and the youth action plan, could this be a place to engage youth and elevate some of the more regional issues they described around bullying and school climate? Is that the kind of thing that could be in play here?
Certainly could be, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I get this is really just kind of permission to think big, and by us giving permission to think big, if you go off and find some really cool thing that we don't kneecap you and we don't like it because we gave you permission to go big. I mean, I think in many ways this is an allowance, and I would maybe argue a little hangover from previous comp plans and previous councils who were not so happy with thinking big. So I think this is a much simpler thing than we're maybe alluding to in terms of permission. Think big, and you have permission. And if it doesn't work, great. We thought big, and if it works, then we win for it. So I think we should just unleash that potential and find those opportunities as they see fit, as they fit into the comp plan going forward.
I think we're still in question phase, but we'll note that for the comment section. So, Kurt, then Tina.
So I'm still a little unclear based on your responses to Mason. Are you imagining that this would, in the process of developing the comp plan, it would identify one or two of these particular things that could be worked on together? Or would it just say, we should work on something with people regionally and we'll figure that out?
Yeah,
I'm
no.
trying to figure out how specific the comp plan itself
It's your first comment that, you know, really the extra effort that we would put towards this concept would be to do that research and have those and do that exploring as to be able to identify something that, you know, everybody agrees that that's what we're going to move forward on. We're obviously not going to achieve that within the short time frame that we have, but if there's the ability to identify the topic or the item or the project or the investment, that's something we would want to formalize within the comp plan. But as far as just existing policy that, you know, we will continue to collaborate, that will carry forward undoubtedly.
Okay, thank you.
Tina. Okay, let's shift to comments. I've got one on calling Tina and then myself and then Ryan.
Yeah, I think this one is a little tricky because it feels sort of like a council priority that we would then invite to work with the county, but not necessarily the other municipalities, which is where some of this gets tricky. I am interested in thinking about doing something like this, but making sure that the guardrails are clear, that it's something that really the city and the county can do. So I would have some concern about doing something with the school district, which has a separate governmental body, unless we collaborate with them as well, but they're not part of this process. And then I would be interested in, we haven't talked as much about energy, but an energy independence strategy I think would be of big interest to me and would make sense at a more regional level than just the city of Boulder. And then I would also add into this conversation the possibility of a food goal, because some of the food conversation might dovetail into a large project that needs support and that definitely needs a regional view, not just a city view.
So my comment would be, I'm hearing from the questions, people kind of struggling with this, because I think my understanding is, on the one hand, of course, right, like we do this already, but please keep at it, except you're talking about maybe some big move, which sounds exciting and really interesting. And so my personal comment might be to say, like, I really am interested in that idea, but I don't think we should create a big collaboration goal just for the sake of doing so. If you hit on one that you're like, no, this is it, like we could really do this, fantastic. But if you kind of cast around and there's like three like maybe ideas, then maybe it's not worth spending time on. Ryan?
I said the bit on transit earlier, so please insert my comments on this. But maybe to also draw out this question of like, is staff already doing this or not? I think it's clear that there's a county transit plan update happening that's about to begin. But it's not the case that we should expect staff on their own to say, hey, we're going to start a new transit agency. This is something that I think we should provide direction for. And I can't remember exactly what I said before, but I'm not fixed to the idea of it being an agency or a transit district as we currently think of it, but just that we would consider establishing goals and performance standards and a commitment to making those things happen, and that would be the idea. And I'm also fine if we end up saying, we've looked at this and we're not going to do it, but just that this is the time when we should be making that evaluation as a community. And so I'd love to see that evaluation be a commitment here.
All right, not seeing any other hands raised. We can go on to the next one. Consider options for enhancing Boulder's night economy. Questions? Yes, Mason.
Another question that makes me feel a little ignorant. What does what does this really look like from a city perspective? Because when I think about this, I think of like market response to demand for nightlife in certain areas of town, et cetera. I'm just curious, just because again I'm ignorant. Like, what does this look like from a city's investment?
Yeah, I mean, certainly this would have to manifest itself initially through policies, right? That would guide the future changes. As one example, future changes to our zoning code or things like that to allow certain types of uses in different parts of the city. But really, this is at its most fundamental level of, is this something that we're interested in? Is it something that we want to pursue as a community, that we see as an opportunity to help support our social connection, our economy over time, et cetera? Establish those policies, but then that trickles down through a number of different implementation strategies, and they could, range from small things like allowing, local cinema in a neighborhood or something like that, to something larger of, really getting behind, larger performing arts centers or other kinds of things that are going to support more of a 24-hour lifestyle within the city.
I'd just like to add too, it might include things like daycares open late at night for workers who work late shifts, those kinds of things as well. So not just entertainment and arts, which are very important, but also other things.
Thanks, Sarah.
Matt?
Yeah, thanks for this. My question is, this seems pretty narrow, in which it seems like it might be. I'm just wondering why this maybe isn't core to our economic development strategy, and or letting that strategy feed a more demand-based understanding, which then could allow us to say, oh, hey, maybe we need zoning changes, or oh my gosh, there's maybe some land use incompatibilities that then would come later. So it just seems this is the first time hearing this, and we didn't talk about it in our economic development strategy. So I think maybe we kind of have the order reversed a little bit. So I'm just sort of wondering where those pieces are at a nexus or not.
Yeah, it's a good question. We certainly are in collaboration with folks working on the economic vitality strategy as well. So this would become sort of part and parcel of that. And their work is informing this. Our work's going to inform their work as well. So it's an iterative process. It's not intended to necessarily be cart before the horse or anything. But really, again, the idea here is like, is this a concept that you all feel like is worth exploring further with the community, and is it something that potentially we need to establish some new or revised policies around?
Taisha and then Lauren.
This is just a universal question that hopefully will be addressed in the next iteration of this, but I noticed that the focus for each of the focus areas, there was information provided about how that focus area was identified. So there was community input, there was the summary of current policy, but for these concepts, it mentions that community members, preliminary research, and consultation by subject area matters. But then there's not anything specific to each subject, to each component. And so, although I appreciate all of this, my question is, it would be helpful as we continue on these concepts to have the specific qualitative and quantitative data that was used to identify these as we think about also prioritization. So for this one in particular, like it would be helpful to know like what data was used to even identify night economy. Was there a geographic reference? Was there age reference? Was there, my question is can we get more qualitative and quantitative data for each of these concepts as we continue these conversations moving forward? Thank you.
Lauren and then Mark W.
I also have a more universal question about this. Are there areas in the comp plan that prohibit us from doing this, that stand in the way of us looking at these things that we need to change, particularly related to this topic, but also related to the other topics that we're looking at? Like I would say clearly the land use map, the physical composition, those I understand as having restrictions within the comprehensive plan, but it feels like a number of these other ones we can do at any point regardless of an update to the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and I think that would be one of the initial steps as, you know, again, if these are deemed worthy of going forward for further research, that would be the initial thing that we would be looking at more closely of, you know, how many of these things are either restricted by the comp plan or there's just not any information in the comp plan at all to guide it. So I think some of these ideas are new, some of them are, you know, emerging out of challenges we have with our current plan, that kind of thing. So it's probably more likely for some of these that there just isn't direction or isn't policy within the plan that would direct us in this way.
I know that we do have regulations around hours of operation and things like that. Does any portion of that sit currently in the comprehensive plan?
My sense is most of that lives within the zoning code and land use code, not within the comp plan.
Thank you.
Mark with a W.
Yeah, I agree with Lauren's comments and Matt's comments. This seems a little small for the comp plan. It seems like something that could be produced by economic vitality, or our vibrant arts and culture community, which is never shy about communicating with us. I just don't know that this is of the consequence that ought to be in the comp plan. So, my view.
Okay, file under comments. We got one more question. Ryan.
Question. When I looked at this before I read the detail, I was thinking about climate change and the case for creating more spaces for people and activities in times that are not hot, and also about demand management and utilizing the systems we have that are dormant when people are sleeping. And I'm just wondering if that was part of the thinking here, or was this really meant to be more kind of recreational?
Yeah, no, I think you raise a great point. It kind of dovetails on Sarah's comment about, you know, daycare and other services and amenities for people that may be working hours that are different. But I think you raise a great point about our energy use and other things like that, and how some of the, again, the sort of shifts of the daily rhythm are starting to change. And so are there opportunities for us to capitalize on that?
Thanks. Comments on this topic? Yep, Tara? Tara says she likes it. I got Emil and also Claudia.
Yeah, so it seems like this would be a vital consideration for the 15-minute neighborhood, where you begin to think about consider it in a 24-hour component. Is like what happens, what opportunities are there, but in a context that you're trying to create livability for a particular area. So I think there's a place that it isn't just about, you know, going to the disco or, you know, what we normally think of as what goes on at night, and some of those other comments that have been made about it, I think. So in integrating it into how we develop the 15-minute neighborhood parameters.
Claudia?
So I anticipated that this one would generate some skepticism amongst my colleagues. I did want to say a few words in its defense. I think that life after dark is a pretty big slice of community life that we do often overlook. It's not just part of an economic vitality strategy. There's this idea that some areas of the city, some populations, some functions might be active at different hours. And those activities are really essential to the functioning of a whole community. And I think that should be part of our planning. And I'm really glad that Ryan mentioned it as well. Night activity is also a climate adaptation. And I think that's another way it's likely to become more important in the future. I don't know what this would look like in the comp plan. Maybe it looks like adding activity hours to our land use map descriptions. Maybe it looks like mapping night activity centers and connections. You may have other ideas, but I think this is a really useful lens to incorporate in some way. And this is a good opportunity to think about how we can have that reflected in our planning.
Nicole?
Yeah, I actually have changed my mind in the course of listening to our conversation here, and I'm really glad that you brought it forward. I do like it. Yeah, no, this is great. You know, some of the things that I am thinking about that would be really curious to hear more about is kind of what Ryan was getting at with the climate impacts, like the public health impacts, as we do get a hotter, drier climate. that's going to make it harder for some people to be outside during the day. And so as we think about equity and sustainability and resilience, how does this fit into it, right? Is it a piece of that? I think that's a really fascinating question for us to think about. And then I also just think about how we could create a night economy as being an interesting one for thinking about equity as well, especially for folks with disabilities and other people who sometimes, or women, often we hear about this too. They're not really feeling comfortable going around in some areas at night, but some people can't see what's in front of them. If you're in a wheelchair, it's really hard to be out at night unless you've got some well-lit spaces. So I think this really just opens up a lot of really rich conversation for us to have as a community and thinking about how we're adapting to a warmer climate, but also how we're just creating a more equitable city. So I think it's very cool, and I'm actually going to change my rating here.
Ryan.
Just to speak, to the importance of this, I mean, if you think about many of our systems, our size, the reasons we have the size of systems like our energy grid and our roads and our parking, they're sized for peak demand. They're sized for the few points at which we have the peakiest demand, and then we're stuck with all of that for the rest of the time, and it's very expensive for all of us when the system is oversized. So I think with hotter days, the system is going to get peakier. That is a cost on all of us. So I think in general, this has a lot of economic relevance. Air pollution is another one. If for moving vehicles around, if you can shave the peak. So yeah, it has a big impact. I don't know what the potential is to actually move these activities to the night, and can we use cargo vehicles at night? Obviously, that would create other considerations, but it does seem like something that would be worth looking at, and especially as we think about the 10+ years ahead that we're aiming for.
Okay, great. And just imagine if there were a taco truck open until 10 o'clock and you could get hot, fresh tacos on your way home after the meeting. Wouldn't that be amazing? Next one. Okay, rethink Boulder Valley's natural infrastructure systems. Questions? Chair, Tina.
Well, I noticed that, I talked to KJ about this already, that we are void of any discussion on our parks. And I'm wondering if this fits into that discuss, does parks fit here, or do we not need to talk about it?
I mean, I think that this is particularly focused on some of the more natural infrastructure systems that we have. However, if you were to ask me personally, I think parks and those two things actually integrate very well, and parks are obviously a much more formalized, sort of human-centered, recreation-based in many cases, not all the time, but many cases. But they still provide a breathing room within the city, right, and as an urbanized area. So parks are critical. This is a bit more focused on the natural systems, but I see those two things happening together.
Tina.
Could this include possibly exposing our irrigation ditches to go into the more urban area of Boulder as a cooling and walking space?
Conceivably, certainly that's ultimately the decision, I think, many times of the ditch company themselves, but those are certainly strategies we could look at.
Okay, thank you. I feel like that's something that's so enjoyed sort of west of Broadway, and to think that then they're covered as you go east where we already have so many heat islands has always felt like a possible opportunity to create this kind of pedestrian and comfort area.
Taisha?
Thank you. Is this a place that like a local green amendment would be considered, which basically guarantees citizens and residents the right to a healthy environment, including clean air and clean water? Also, I'm curious if there were conversations around environmental and climate justice response. So although I appreciate the focus on natural areas, there's also the debt that we owe for allowing, pollution in the water and the air and those kinds of things. So I was just kind of curious the scope of this of this particular dimension.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's really, we would part of the research would be to look at, again, our existing systems that are out there today and see and look more closely at their geographic locations and look at the communities that are nearby, and understand, are there ways that these systems can provide more uses and more amenities than maybe they do today. They might serve a primarily stormwater function, but are there ways that they can actually serve as spaces when it's not serving that stormwater function? So thinking about it more broadly in terms of rather than just sort of the narrow focus on, the creek is going to carry water, or the creek, has great riparian habitat, looking at ways that those can be broadened and serve all the community members that are particularly that are nearby and may not have access or as good of access to all the other parks or open space or other systems.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Nicole.
Yeah, just another question about the kinds of things that might fit in here. In some of the engagement, the idea of food as a utility came up. Is that something that would fit into this category, or is that something different?
I think that actually could be part of this conversation, because again, if we think about kind of our natural infrastructure or our natural systems, that undoubtedly includes a lot of the city-owned open space and other those other systems that are incorporated with that, and we allow agricultural uses on those areas. So I think that could very well be part of this conversation, and perhaps there's even opportunities for some of our existing open areas within the city to provide some of that space for those kinds of activities as well.
Cool, thank you.
Laura.
Hi, just two quick comments on this one. One, I think that this idea of having more community use of our existing waterways, for example, is a really wonderful one. And I see people doing that informally now. Like when you ride along the bike path, sometimes you see, teenagers sunbathing on the sides of the creek, sort of squeezed in next to the bike path or something. So I think this is a great area for more community outreach and understanding how are people doing this now and how would they like to see it expanded. That's one. And then around the idea of food systems, one thing that I think was really cool in Denver is that they had a model where a private homeowner could basically provide use of their land and pay the water bill for a nonprofit group to come in and do gardening in their yard or on their lawn. And that would replace some of our, shall we say, non-productive private open space with food production. If the homeowner consents to that. So I think looking into that kind of model and that kind of program could be really interesting in terms of how we expand our green space and our food production and do sort of private-public partnerships.
Thanks. All right, well, let's take that as a segue into comments. No, Lauren, you have a follow-up question? Okay, one quick question, then we'll go to comments.
Could this, in looking at stormwater management in new ways, could this include stormwater detention in right-of-ways or below grade?
Maybe. No, I think, again, the value of the comprehensive plan process is that all options are on the table for discussion. So absolutely.
Why do we get the sense you've thought of this before, Lauren? All right, comments on this topic. We got Kurt, Mark, Taisha.
Yeah. A couple of the things that you mentioned here, managing stormwater and open space requirement, I think are opportunities for some really great changes. I've always thought that we should be able to provide bioswales at our curb space that can buffer some stormwater and add a little micro park, a little green space to reduce the heat island effect and also calm traffic. And in terms of the open space requirements, we require 60 feet of private open space for every unit in a lot of places, but it ends up getting all chopped up and it's not used very efficiently. If we could combine those and make it public open space, then all of a sudden it becomes a really productive, micro park or something like that. So replacing some of the private open space requirements with a public, basically a payment into a public open space fund, I think could be really beneficial.
Mark with an M.
I support this in a very specific way. I think this is my fourth year as the representative to the Greenways Advisory Committee, which has met twice in 4 years. Our greenways, which is our creek paths, Goose Creek Path, Boulder Creek Path, these are critical pieces of what identifies Boulder. And they are everyone's responsibility and no one's responsibility. If you can tell me which departments are responsible for the greenway, well, it is open space, it is parks, it is transportation, but I'm amazed that they're in the good condition that they are without any direct oversight. So I think this is an opportunity to take this asset, bring it into the BVCP, create policies around it, and I would hope actually give this to someone for oversight, because our greenways are so important, and yet, you know, no one really manages them completely.
Taisha.
Thank you. I'm a huge component of this particular topic, and again, just really push us to think boldly. There is no city that has adopted a local green amendment that would prioritize environment in our decision making. And so again, I think one of the things I'm noticing is it's feeling like nature is open space as opposed to nature is everywhere. And so that's kind of just making sure that when we're using this language, that it's in our most urban environments, and I love Laura's example of changing those unproductive lawns that actually hurt our biodiversity goals into something that is both good for habitat, good for humans, and our non-human kin. So those are the kinds of things I would push us on. And then I'm still wondering where our waste and materials management is. It was great to see the stormwater component here, but I do think that there needs to be some significant advancements in that area. And then just in general around water, I just started the water fluency course with Water Education Colorado. Again, national experts and local experts reminding us that we are in a mega drought. And so, I'm still seeing all of what has been presented as not necessarily responsive to the critical, urgent, and important demands that our climate is asking of us. And I'm just seeing a lot of nice to haves versus what is urgent and important to ensure that people have access to clean air, clean water. And as somebody who has water utility and real authority around energy, I'm just hoping that this is a little bit more robust than, but I'm very excited and appreciative of this. And then lastly, of course, the environmental justice components, recognizing that we have community members, right, who have less access to clean air, clean water. And as a city, we have a debt and responsibility to address those issues. Thank you.
Tina, then Ryan.
Yeah, I think this is a great focus area, and my only thought would be to pay extra attention or spend extra time getting youth voice, in particular people who are further away from greenways or are close to greenways, I guess, the opposite. I think that would be particularly valuable for this.
Ryan.
So I really like this, and I like the use of native natural systems to provide infrastructure, such as around transportation, bioswales, like Kurt mentioned, and using the BVCP as a way to provide direction that would require departments to work together on that sort of thing that otherwise might not happen. But secondly, I want to maybe just remind folks that last week when we were here, we had a discussion about fire, and I think if we wanted to make, there's just going to be a lot of hard trade-offs in this world that we are trying to build, in which we want to both be safe and also have a community that we want to live in. And when we are having a discussion focused on fire, you can really batten down the hatches and say just make everything concrete and inorganic, and that solves that problem. But we need more than that. And I think we're going to have to, as a community, have more and more of these kind of difficult trade-off discussions. And to the extent we can provide guidance through this space of how to think about those trade-offs, I think it would be very helpful to do it in an integrated way.
All right. Well, that brings us to our last one. We're in the home stretch. It is after 9 o'clock, so let's see if we can do this one relatively quickly. We are ourselves the night economy. There should be more tacos. Consider options to reawaken Boulder's funkiness. Questions on this topic? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Any comments on this topic? Nicole?
Yeah, this one to me feels like the outcome of what we will get by focusing on some of these other things. So I don't know that I see this one as sort of, especially outside of the arts blueprint and some of the other things we're looking at, as a specific thing to focus on. I really think if we're doing these other things, we're going to get there.
Laura?
I want to say I like this one a lot. This comes up a lot in conversations that we have with the community and at planning board, that people feel like Boulder has lost some of its uniqueness, that they don't like the kind of architecture they're getting. They don't like the kind of public spaces that we're building. They don't like the fact that it's hard for artists to live here. So I agree, it crosses a lot of the other work that we're already doing. But I think it does bear thinking about how are the policies that we're encouraging helping to either maintain or working against a sense of uniqueness and a sense of funkiness and artisticness in Boulder. This came up a lot in the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan process, and it's really hard to figure out how this works into policy. So I think using this as a focus for engagement and trying to get people really thinking about this. I know that in the Bloomberg housing focus groups that they did, there were a lot of really creative ideas that were generated around this topic. And so even though it may be hard to visualize why this is different, I think it is useful to use this as a prompt for input and engagement.
Lauren?
Thank you. I agree. I find this one really interesting. I don't know exactly what the outcome of it is, like many of these, but I think especially as we have Sundance in our future, and I think a lot of part of the interest in Boulder has to do with kind of our local feel. But I also think that, that's likely to bring kinds of investment that could gentrify and it might be harder to hold on to that feel that we still have. And so I think that it is a good time to look at how we help protect and support new kinds of funkiness in Boulder.
Tina, and then Tara.
Yeah, I really like this one, and I'm not sure how it fits. For me, it would be almost like a lens for other areas when we think about the local economy and how much we love the sink, and we're not sure we want a lot of fast food chains in downtown Boulder, or or we want local business owners if possible. Just the arts, we have the arts plan, I think, would also reflect this, and housing type. And I think even Lauren, you've mentioned that some of our requirements actually lead to architecture that might be less interesting just because of certain policies. And so looking at some of those policies with that lens, I don't know if it's a standalone item or sort of like a different scale or something.
Tara?
I feel like if we had this on our comp plan, that we'd be able to have the Voodoo Donuts building be pink, which is what a lot of us did want. So I went from nice to explore to need to explore for this.
You just got Lauren's vote. Mark?
I'm going contrarian here. I think this is not the role of government. Funkiness is created by people, by creativity, by opportunity, to be funky. And I think if we want to explore changing our use tables, changing our zoning and stuff to allow things that are funky, but you're not going to get funkiness by the government interjecting themselves into experiences. I mean, I like funkiness. I like funky experiences, but the BVCP as a guiding document is not the place for this. Now, the Department of Community Vitality, change it to the Department of Party Planning and let them go.
Mark with the W.
I'm going to agree with Mark with an M. you know, cities do change over time. I first started coming here in 1980, and it was a pretty funky town. Um, it's a lot less funky today. I just don't know that it should be a government objective to restore us to the conditions of 1980, um, you know, and try to artificially create funkiness. I have sad news to report, but Woodstock is done. I mean, and you know, trying to go back in history and be something that we were but are not now. To me, look, I think it's a futile task, and um, and I agree with Mark. If somebody wants to do something a little unusual, they will do something a little unusual. But as a government policy, as provisions, what are those provisions going to look like in the comp plan? The funkiness section? Um, you know, it's a little odd to me. So, thank you.
Taisha, and then let's see if we can wrap up.
Okay. um, I'm I'm struggling with the word choice of funkiness, but I do see and agree with my colleagues around the overarching purpose, which to me it translates more appropriately as uniqueness. And I think it's ironic that one of my colleagues talked about the funkiness in that one context, but then spoke so so articulately about our height limitations as something that makes our Boulder, is a major characteristic, right? And so, I agree that our current policies limit innovation, limit creativity, and limit in ingenuity. And so I don't know if funkiness or, this word choice or approach will stick. I am interested in addressing issues or barriers to innovation, creativity, and ingenuity in our comprehensive plan. And so if it needs to be a set aside in order to do that, I'm fine with that. But the overarching things I am 100% in agreement of. And I also just want to circle back to what Laura said around the historic assets as well, and just getting real clear on what we think an asset is now, because 50 years is not an asset make anymore. And so I don't know if that can if this bucket can capture that as well. I'm even more of a proponent for it. So thank you very much.
And with that, I'll turn back to you all. Any final thoughts that you'd like to offer up?
The only thing before Sarah's struggling with the PowerPoint over there, but we'll get there. I just want to say thank you. That was a ton of information. You did a really, really good job at staying on task and on time. We're only 10 minutes over, so thank you. That was great. That's exactly the kind of input that we are looking for. Please make sure and don't forget to fill out your worksheet. We will collect those at the end of the meeting. We do have one last slide just on
Oh, it's not.
the next steps, the very last slide.
I'm tired, so I'm technologically challenged right now. Sorry, everybody.
Slide 40.
I can't.
Just push the button.
Sorry.
We're almost there.
It's not that long, I promise.
A matter of minutes.
See?
And keep going. There it is. Okay,
Yay.
there we go.
Okay.
Sarah, take it away.
You already said everything I was going to say, but thank you guys for sticking with us. It was a long night, but we got a lot of great feedback. We really appreciate it. And it will really help us with our next phase of work over the summer. We got a tight timeline. We're going to start research on some of these ideas and gather that data and information that I think Council Member Adams, you were requesting for some of these concepts. That's part of what we're working on over the summer. And then this June, we're going to start talking to partner agencies. We'll be checking in with groups like RTD, BVSD, CU, other partner organizations, just to share what we're doing, hear what they're doing, what they're planning, so we can make sure that our comp plans and their plans are in alignment, or at least have conversations about that. And then in mid-July, we'll have community conversations about preliminary policy options based on the analysis we do. And land use strategies and balancing various community needs. So that's the next big focus for community engagement, July. So there'll be some times where you guys can join some of those conversations. So please keep your eye out for information about that. And then from early August to September, the community change request application window opens, and that will give community members the opportunity to request land use changes and or plan changes. They can request any change. So that will happen. And then also starting in August, we start we'll open the statistically valid survey and an online companion question form to get additional feedback related to our options that we're thinking of. And I think planning board member Kaplan mentioned that there was some things that would be good for that survey. So we'll take a look at that and think about including some of those questions. And then in late August, we're coming back to you. So we'll be providing a summary of what we do over the summer and some of our analysis of alternatives and get your direction to guide future study of preferred options. That's when we'll come to you with some conversations about that. We'll meet with Planning Board on August 26th and Council on August 28th. And we also will be speaking with advisory boards in September. So we got a busy few months. But we thank you for sticking with us and doing the work with us. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Mayor, to close out the meeting.
Very good. Kurt, you have a quick question?
Yeah, just a quick question about the public change request applications. That's for the land use map, right? But we're also thinking about potentially completely rethinking what the land use map looks like. And so how do those go together?
Yeah, great question. So right now, because we don't know if the land use map will fully change, that land use application process will basically include all of the existing designations as they are today. As we move forward through the process, there is a requirement. We will come to both of you in January with the list of all the applications that we receive, and then we go through a public hearing to identify those that would actually carry forward. As part of that process, we will actually identify if any of those designations are shifting or if staff is going to recommend changes to the map that would incorporate a number of those different applications. So it's a little bit challenging. We don't have a perfect sequence for where we could adjust the map and then ask for public changes and things like that. So the public change request will occur first, and we will capture all that information and then roll that into any possible sort of substantive changes to the land use map that we may propose at some point in the future. But again, we don't know if that's actually going to happen or not.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, complicated, but it did. Yeah. Okay, well, everybody, thanks so much for an efficient and productive meeting. Before we close, I just wanted to offer one little bit of news. Miss Alicia did just email us that the out of Excel ballot measure has been withdrawn, so there will be no resident-initiated petitions on the ballot this fall. Just thought it'd be interesting to know. And with that, good night, everybody, and good luck finding some tacos. We're done.